And Vanessa, you're live.
I'd like to call to order this meeting. This is a Redmond City Council study session held on Tuesday, January 9th, 2024, commencing at 7 p.m. Council members in attendance are Councilmember Salahuddin, Councilmember Stewart, Councilmember Fields, Councilmember Anderson, Councilmember Nueva Camina, Council Vice President Forsyth online, and myself, Council President Kritzer. There are 3 items on the agenda tonight: Redmond 2050 Phase 2 policies, second drafts, Southeast Redmond Park Master Plan update, and council talk time. The first item on the agenda is the Redmond 2050 Phase 2 policies, second drafts. Carol Helen, Director of Planning and Community Development, will introduce this item.
Thank you so much, Council President Kritzer. Good evening, Mayor and council members. Tonight, Planning and Community Development staff are here to discuss your input on the second drafts of several comprehensive plan elements as part of the continued review on Redmond 2050. This packet was robust, so I did send it out to you ahead of time via email on December 28th, and I would welcome your feedback on whether that was helpful or not when we get to the end. Later this evening, staff will introduce these second drafts of capital facilities, utilities, natural environment, and climate resilience and sustainability for discussion. But before we do that, we have a pleasure of having our members of our Community Advisory Committee join us this evening, and I'd like to introduce Adam Coleman and Sing-Yi Joffrey, who are the chair and vice chair of our Redmond 2050 Community Advisory Committee. So Sing-Yi and Adam are going to share more about the work of the CAC. By way of introduction, I want to say how thankful we are to them for all of their hard work and their dedication of time and effort this month and for the past 3 years to provide community voice in Redmond 2050. And I'm hoping that you'll get some recognition and an evening tomorrow night to wrap up your work as well. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff Churchill to introduce the CAC work.
Good evening, council members. Adam and Sing-Yi, thanks for coming this evening. I'm going to briefly describe what the CAC did and then turn it over to Sing-Yi and Adam to talk about who the CAC is. Then I'll talk a little bit about the process and what the CAC did, and Adam and Sing-Yi will close it out with kind of the takeaways and the big picture opportunities and challenges. So the Community Advisory Committee for Redmond 2050 had kind of a 3-pronged purpose: to advise staff on goals and policies in the Redmond Comprehensive Plan, also to be community ambassadors to really let people in their networks know about Redmond 2050, and then a lot of our meetings were really spent reviewing draft documents. So everything you had in your packet tonight, council members, the Community Advisory Committee also has had in their packet over the last few months. So let me turn it over to Cindy and Adam to talk about who is the CAC.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jeff. Hi, everyone. Again, I'm Sing-Yi Joffrey. I've been the chair of the committee for about 3 years now. We've been looking at documents, and really all of us are volunteers. And so as you'll see in the list, it really ranges from, we have high school students who are part of the CAC all the way up to people who've lived in Redmond for 60 plus years. And everybody gets involved for, different reasons. And so I thought what we could do today is just kind of share a little bit, at least for Adam and I, why we joined, and to kind of give you a sense of, why we're part of it and, what we're hoping to kind of contribute in this process. So for myself, just to share a little bit about my background, when I was growing up in high school, I lived not here in Redmond, but back in Michigan, and I had gone through a period of homelessness, and so, I spent quite a lot of time, getting to know like city resources and things like that at a pretty young age, and I was pretty passionate about, that was what kind of got me into college and got me to where I am now. So I really am passionate about, I think, having a community that's really strong and helping everybody in the community succeed. And then I've been here in Redmond now around 8 years, and reached a lot of life milestones here. And so from internship when I was, living in a small apartment to, getting our first like townhome rental to, eventually purchasing our first home with my husband here and getting involved in the community. My husband's a teacher at Redmond High School. And so we've also had a lot of great, I was just telling Vanessa that in the first year of the Redmond 2050, we even got some of his students involved, and we did like a school project where students were kind of envisioning what they would want to see in Redmond in 2050. And so just really passionate, I think, about, thinking about our community, how to give back, and how to make, as we move forward to Redmond 2050, how do we maintain a lot of that community support for each other.
Thank you. The other thing I wanted to do just before I talk about a little bit about me is to thank as well. We want to thank Jeff and Glenn and Becky and Lauren and Ian and Audra and everybody else that spent a ton of time with us as community members once a month, every Thursday for the last 3 years. So thank you all for really, really making it an engaging thing to be involved with. I'm Adam Coleman. I've been in Redmond 14 years. My wife and I work here. Our son has just gone to college, so he has lived here for a significant amount of time as well. And we love living in Redmond. It's just a great place to live. Why did I get involved here, apart from just the community side of it? A bit of background as well for me. So I'm hopefully you can still tell I'm actually from the UK. And I come from a town called Chippenham, and Chippenham's in a fairly rural area. It's a little bit like Redmond, but it was actually founded in 850 AD, long time ago. And when I think about the town now, there were decisions made in the 60s, planning decisions. It was a beautiful town, had Georgian buildings in the downtown and a beautiful bridge. And they made some really terrible decisions in the 60s, which actually resonate and echo now in the way that people's experiences are in the town. And it's an amazing spot in terms of where it is, in terms of it's on the main train line, it's on the main motorway. But the actual planning decisions back then really affect people today. My parents still live in that town, my brother still lives in that town, I go back fairly regularly. So it's rare to have the opportunity to be involved in something where you can actually look ahead 30 years, particularly where you live. So for me, it's like Redmond's in a significant moment of change and has been over the last few years and will continue to be so. So for me, really, it was really about like, what do we want Redmond to be for our kids? Hopefully we'll all have certain children who can be here in the future, and it's really related to that. Thank you for the opportunity of doing it. It's been a lot of fun.
And then just in terms of, before Jeff jumps into the next part, in terms of our role in all of this, like really all the policies and things like that, of course, city staff put together. And so a lot of us on the council, are not like, a lot of this is our first time, getting involved in the city. And so, a lot of us are coming at it from more of like, what is our experiences living in the city, right? What are the things that, people talk about, like their commutes and, bike trails that they love and things like that are really near and dear to their hearts. So that's kind of the perspective. So if you see kind of like that feedback column next to a lot of the different policies that you're reading about, some of those kind of came from different members of the CAC.
I'm going to spend a very small amount of time talking about kind of how the CAC worked and how the work of the CAC filters into what you're reading as council members. This is a very simplified flow chart, I guess, of how information is getting to the city council, where the input is going. So the CAC, Community Advisory Committee, is in the blue box. They're providing information mainly directly to staff in the monthly meetings and between those monthly meetings. Cindy and Adam were also good enough to come and present to the Planning Commission in October, and so provided direct input in that way. And then, of course, are here tonight to provide direct input to you. But you're also seeing the results of their work as the policy drafts evolve. That some of the changes that occur from the first drafts to the second drafts are the result of the input provided by the CAC. And so it comes to you directly, but also indirectly. When the Community Advisory Committee started at the end of 2020, we spent a little bit of time on just kind of what is planning and how does that work in Washington State, and what is it that we need to do with Redmond 2050. And that's similar information that we've provided to council in the past. We then dove into every element of the plan in basically the same sequence as the Planning Commission, as the City Council. But broadly, most of the time, the Community Advisory Committee saw the drafts first, and then the City Council, or then the Planning Commission, excuse me, and then the City Council. And so all the elements are here on the slide in the tiles. And then, as we have done with Planning Commission and City Council, there were a couple of topics that threaded through multiple elements and are a little bit cross-cutting. The idea of complete neighborhoods is one of them. And then this new idea of community design is another. And so after 3 years of discussion, we asked the Community Advisory Committee members, all of them, to let us know kind of what they thought the biggest opportunities were to make a difference in this plan update, and what the biggest challenges they see are for Redmond going forward. And Adam and Zini are going to attempt to distill all of that into a few minutes of discussion here for you tonight.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, we'll touch on kind of two big themes that we think we saw around opportunities to make a difference. One was we spent quite a lot of time talking about, what we want our community to look and feel like. I think especially coming as community members, living in different parts of the community, I think it was really important for a lot of people that we kind of maintain walkable neighborhoods, neighborhoods that feel like complete and have, interesting things in them. And that I think there was a lot of alignment on the committee that we wanted each of the different parts of Redmond to kind of still feel like distinct from each other and not just be, I think somebody had said before, like, we don't want to be like just like Bellevue, or something like that, but have like, our own feel. And I think where we feel like it's different right now is we love our parks. We love, all the things that we have today that make Redmond feel just a little bit more, I think, less like city-like than, like Bellevue, but, recognizing that we also need to grow our density and grow, so how do we kind of keep that same feel? So city staff had kind of worked with us going from neighborhood to neighborhood, talking about, what we wanted that to look like. And we also kind of talked about, how do we then plug in the different services and things like that into those neighborhoods, and where do we feel like the need was highest in certain neighborhoods for that. And so I think, some of the themes we saw were, I think Overlake became, a big area of not only growth, but also thinking about how do we maintain services there and make sure, even with light rail going in, what are the different transportation options to get to, places like, like the senior center and things like that. So, and I think that was largely, where we saw the community get most excited, I think, is when we started talking about, the different look and feel of different places. And I think the other thing is, the biking. I think there's quite a few people who join the council because they love how much they can bike around, if you think Redmond. And so I know we have at least 2 to 3 members who can probably name several routes around the city that they really want to maintain kind of a shaded biking route that continues to feel like it's an active place. Mm-hmm. Do you want to touch on the inclusion and transportation?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, on the inclusion side, there's a quote actually that we have that's included in the documents that really talks about sort of increasing density while ensuring diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's from one of the members who wrote in because of we were asking for input. So that really sums up a lot of what we're really talking about with inclusion and making sure that, you have, for example, affordability. So how does that work? How do you make sure when you've got that increased density, how do you increase affordability and enable that for everyone to be able to, have that ownership opportunity, those sorts of elements. The condos versus apartments discussion came up a lot in terms of how do we enable people to be able to, have that ability to buy. The aspect of duplex, triplex, quadplex, is that a term? Well, I guess it is now. But anyway, something like that. But the ability for people to build those in other parts of Redmond, as well as, when we talk about inclusion, making sure that people who have lived here for a long time also feel that, you know, it's actually working for them too in that environment. So making sure you don't alienate people who've been here for a long time, as well as helping people, you know, come in and as that changes. And you know, effectively, it's just ensuring that we sort of enable all people in the community to feel welcome and feel like they can actually live here and have the same experience as somebody else who's been here for a long time. So, you know, that's the growth aspect and that sort of culture and, you know, economic diversity. So, there we go.
Yeah, but good with the opportunities comes many challenges. And so I think over the last 3 years, we've seen kind of common themes come up again and again when we look at the policies around, you know, I think in particular things that tend to have tensions with each other. So, you know, one is I think we're all in agreement that we love walkability and, you know, and having transportation options and having them be frequent. But, you know, one of the trade-offs then is maybe like noise pollution and things like that, right? And so there's some inherent tensions. But I think in particular, two sides of the council we've really seen is there's, you know, the group that's really, really passionate, I think, about sustainability and how do we, you know, how do we meet our sustainability goals? Are we being, you know, urgent enough about our goals as well as what we're doing? But at the same time, you know, in the same breath, we also want to address like, you know, the housing affordability and things like that. And so I think I would say like both kind of felt like equally important to people, to various people on the council. And so those came up, you know, again and again. So I think when we looked through the policies, a lot of it was kind of like, okay, you know, is this being too prescriptive and will this make it so that, you know, all houses have to be like super expensive, you know, or, you know, oh, is this policy, you know, not, I guess, like have enough teeth to it when it comes to enforcing sustainability goals. So I think that tended to be a lot of the patterns that we saw as we were reading through the documents.
When we talk about the infrastructure piece, you know, with the decision, you know, some time ago to make sure there was a lot of that density downtown, and with light rail coming in, that was a big part of the discussion when it came to infrastructure in terms of accessibility there to light rail. What does that mean? How does that work? The walkability and accessibility for everybody. So whatever your need to actually get to that place, how does that happen? The other, I think, fairly significant conversation we had was around last mile travel, which is related to that. My family and I, we live on Education Hill. It's a bit of a hill to get down to get into downtown, but it's certainly on the way back, but it's not that far. And that is something which a lot of people talked about. How do you get accessibility in terms of being able to get to light rail when it comes in from different parts of Redmond? The other aspect, this is just a personal comment, which is if you thought 30 years ago of what Redmond would be like now and the abilities to have electric cars, people probably thought, we'll probably have flying cars at this point. We don't, but, you know, we've all hopefully watched Back to the Future too. But ultimately, how do we think about the nature of technology and technology change that we don't know now? So in 30 years' time, what will it be like going from where we live down to light rail? And thinking outside the box a little bit and what might come feels like something which we should consider, because the whole point of our committee was to think 30 years out as much as like 5 years out. So that was one other part. The other thing is sensitivity of what that actually means in terms of infrastructure and having everything so focused downtown with light rail coming in. That's going to, you know, change the nature of downtown. So, some of the things we talked about earlier about what's the feeling of Redmond that's going to change. So there was some degree of sort of concern there, and how do we make sure that's both a safe place for people to be and a place where people want to be, and that light rail is something people feel like, I want to go use that. So it's so central to the centre of town. So that transportation aspect and accessibility to it was really key. I don't know, the other thing that's not on the infrastructure piece here was about local community. So I'll touch on that quickly. What we mean by that is we had a very good conversation, I think, positive conversation about how do you make things more local. So for example, in different parts of Redmond where, you've got to go somewhere. You've got to go to, QFC or Trader Joe's, or you name the place you're trying to go and buy. How can you do more of that locally? How can you make more local kind of community in places where you don't have, say, a small shop area or a coffee shop and those sorts of things? How can we actually make that feel more like a community experience for people in places where it doesn't exist at the moment? Are there properties where that's possible to do as well? So that was a fairly significant conversation one of the evenings. People were very energized by that. How you make that happen, again, we're not sure exactly how that would work, but that was something which is pretty key.
So Jeff, I think that was all we had. Do you all have any questions for us or about the feedback?
Thank you so much for sharing those insights, Ms. Joffrey and Mr. Coleman. Are there any questions for our presenters? And Councilmember Salahuddin.
Just a very brief question. Do you have a guess of how many folks are on this committee?
Yeah, that's a great one. I know Jeff probably has the official number, but I'd say over the last 3 years, we had kind of one cohort that came in at the beginning, and that lasted probably most of the way through 2 years, right, Jeff? And that was maybe around 15 to 20 people. And then kind of midway through, we had quite a few people who couldn't extend, past that. And so then we brought on, I think, an additional 15 people, Jeff, or 10, maybe 10 people, yeah. We brought on.
Yeah, I think about a couple dozen total.
Mm-hmm.
A quick follow-up to that. How do folks get involved with the committee? How can, general public provide feedback to this committee?
Yeah, that's a great point. So I know there's several ways to get involved. So being on the committee, I know we're just wrapping up our work now. So this next Thursday is our last meeting after 3 years. But for future things like this, I think a lot of us just went through an application online, and then Mayor Bernie went through them and selected, applicants. But in terms of getting feedback into the process, there's been a ton of community events, almost at every, like Derby Days or, a Redmond Lights Festival. There's almost always a Redmond 50 booth. And then in addition, there's a bunch of different ways you can get involved, either through online polls or events, that the city will run around, how do you feel about this map, and things like that. So there's a lot of different ways to get involved. And, I was telling Vanessa too that, sometimes there'll be outreach to specific groups as well. And so, we've done that with schools, and Jeff has done that with various local community groups as well.
Thank you so much. And one quick follow-up for the staff on this. First of all, just want to recognize that from the timing, if I can calculate correctly, we've been serving for over 3 years on this. Really incredible. Thank you for that time. For the staff, I'm curious, because we'll be continuing some of the work this year as we get close to the final drafts. Will there be a reconvening of this group at any point, or is this really the closeout and then it'll be passed now to Planning Commission to finish off that part of the work?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's really the latter. The Community Advisory Committee has seen at least 2 drafts of every element. And so based on the feedback from the Community Advisory Committee, we are revising those second drafts and input also from Planning Commission, City Council, to bring final drafts to the Planning Commission for hearings and study sessions before adoption later this year.
Great, thank you. And I see Councilmember Stewart has her hand raised.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to thank you both so much for your years of service on this and hearing your the things that were important to you. I felt really confident that we heard that feedback in the various drafts that we've been seeing. So it was such a nice reminder to have you share things that have been so central to the documents that we've been reviewing thus far in the process. So I really do hope that you will both stay very engaged, because after we complete this wonderful comprehensive plan, we have the work of implementing it for the next generation. So again, just thank you both so much.
I would definitely echo that. Thanks. Councilmember Fields.
Thank you. So as I read and I listened, it's pretty clear that a lot of the discussions that you all had reflect to a very large extent the discussions and concerns, conflicts, opportunities. I can't think of any more words, sorry, but that we've had on council as far as our envisioning a future Redmond. And I've been in Redmond mostly since 76. So I've been here a while. And I see the work that you've done. I have a couple questions. There's a point where identifying the problem is great, but then you go, oh, what are the details of the solution? And I don't know that the council we've made progress, but you're down there in the detail and you're talking to people who have a variety of interests. That was impressive too, by the way, the number of people that are inputting. But how can this process be empowered or improved to actually bring those concerns and those ideas and those conflicts to a place where we have a good path forward? What suggestions, I'm not asking you to solve that problem, I'm asking you to say, what suggestions based on your experience and the troubles that you went through, what can we do to make it going forward more specific, more concrete, more empowered?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good question. And I know that's something that we've struggled with a lot on the committee the last 2 years, because city staff always has to remind us, like, hey, you're giving feedback on not even necessarily like policies all the time, right? They're like plans for the future, and they need to be worded in a way that give room for, city council to be able to implement different solutions in the future that might come up. And so I think a lot of that has been, the conversations have been up-leveled, but in the committee itself, I think there's been a lot of people who really want to talk about, for instance, for sustainability, right? There's been a ton of ideas brought up around like, hey, what are some like micro, experiments we could do? And I think there's a real appetite on the committee for trying things, and not necessarily always having to have it be like a, citywide plan or things like that, right? And so I think that there was always like kind of this feel for like, hey, we want to like have these like micro experiments or these ways to move faster and with more urgency. And so I think, that was, and I think there was a little bit more appetite for, doing things that, maybe are a little bit more innovative in terms of, like building, I think, I'm trying to think, like there was a lot of talk about like rooftop, experiments, right? Like how do you leverage that space better for, for instance, like schools that are integrated into, mixed use communities and things like that. And so I think, I'm not sure, Jeff probably knows like where some of those like more smaller suggestions are captured versus, right, like what you're seeing most of the time in the documents are more the very up-leveled kind of policies that we all kind of like gave feedback on at the end and said like, yes, this seems to fit all the like very specific things that we, also talked about during the committee.
Yeah, I think, thinking about your question about concerns, I think a lot of the conversation we had was about like what's opportunities and how do we deal with that. But there were certainly some places, I think, where there was tension in terms of the conversation. One of those is around things like homelessness, in terms of thinking about the increase of things that might happen with light rail. So certainly that came up. But the other side of the coin to that, to your question, is having very active, specific, communicated details to the community. So here's what our assumptions may be, and here's what we plan to do in certain situations. Sometimes it's really about scenario planning. So scenario A, here's what we would do. Scenario B, here's what we do. But being particularly specific to some of those places. To be honest, there weren't that many of those, but that is certainly one that came up that I know is something we need to consider, and that came up with the group.
Yeah, and I will say that also I think, at least for Redmond 2050, because we're looking so far into the future, I think there were like a lot of concerns around like how do we as community members get more involved in like the specific things before, like we see the impact, right? I know somebody had brought up, for instance, like, there was like a row of trees that got, cut down right along where they bike every day, and now there's like a stretch that's super hot to bike, or something like that, right? And they were like, well, we didn't really know that was happening until it happened, and then, how do we as community members, see those things ahead of time and like have a way to get involved, I think, in terms of specific implementation. And it was really hard to like take that problem and say, like, how do we up-level that into a policy that would protect that, right? Because the policy that like enabled that to happen was also made for a good reason, right? Like so that sidewalks could be built, in a place that feels safer. And so, I think there were a lot of those like natural tension things where people kind of felt like, yes, this policy sounds good, but the specific implementation of this policy feels like it flew in the face of like, something else that we really cared about.
Yeah.
So that's great, because that was actually my second question.
Yeah.
And I mean, the CAC is a great idea, and it's needed, it's necessary. But hopefully, any organization creates a legacy of involvement and creates a legacy, the inertia of inviting people in, and as the plan unfolds and the details become more clarified, will we maintain that community engagement and that community involvement? And so I appreciate, that was my question. You kind of already answered it, so thank you.
Can I add something as well? Yeah, we haven't talked, necessarily about the people that are involved. There's some people who are very passionate. We're just reflecting some of our own views, obviously, but the views of everybody who's been on the committee, and a lot of them for 3 years. So whether we can continue with that, whether it's an outside-in group that you go to on an as-needed basis, but people have invested that time. The other thing I'd say, I was just thinking about, the slide that Jeff was showing earlier about all the different aspects that we talked about, it's housing or transportation, et cetera. And I was reflecting on, what does that mean when we think about the work we've been doing? It's really hard to look into the future and think about 30 years ahead. So I was going to ask this question here, which was, what would you want people to describe? How would you want a visitor or a new resident to describe Redmond in 2050? To really boil it down, when somebody comes here, either as a new resident or someone who's coming to visit you as a family member, when they go home, what would you want to say about Redmond and their experience? Hopefully everybody's probably got some thoughts around that, but that's the thing that struck me at the end of all of this, which is that's what we're really trying to do, is make that experience great for everybody, whether a visitor or a resident, and how you describe it. So thank you.
Such a good question for us to marinate on. Are there other questions from the council? All right, seeing no others, I'm going to ask one of my questions. Have many for you, but I will ask, you mentioned how you had a lot of conversations about the future kind of distinction between our neighborhoods and how the kind of feel of the different neighborhoods. And today we're going to be discussing that element that is new in the comp plan as well around community design. In particular, in this comp plan, we have in Overlake, we're planning to see a ton of growth, as well as some changes in downtown and some of our other areas. So I'm curious if you could just give us some top lines of how the group that you were with was envisioning, for example, the differences between Overlake versus downtown, that look and feel. How would you describe it at a high level?
Yeah, that's a good one. I'm trying to think of like a couple words that have come to mind. I know we talked about like downtown, it kind of feels like almost done, like in the sense that like it is absorbing, growth, but it kind of feels like, people kind of feel like, okay, that's like a traditional kind of downtown Pacific Northwest, kind of building feel. Maybe a little bit more bustling, hopefully a lot of walkability and things like that. And then I know in Overlake, we've had several conversations. One is, how do we kind of pay homage to kind of the natural, like organic, Asian community that's kind of sprung up there in Overlake. And so I know that's been some topic discussion around how did the community feel about, kind of leaning into that as a city and doing a little bit more of like an international district or building parks that were kind of inspired by that in particular by Crossroads area. And I'm trying to think like other parts of Overlake, I think, because I think it's so like parking lot heavy right now, I think people are having a really hard time like envisioning like, okay, you know, like how are we building the look and feel of it? But I think the idea is that they didn't want it to just be like a copy carbon stamp of what is in downtown right now. And so maybe like buildings that, yeah, like have a little bit more like heritage feel, either because of like the Asian flair or because of, you know, maybe we can build up some other like more like artsy cultural kind of feel. You know, and so I think that was some of the discussion. And I know industrial district was like more what people were picturing coming out of like the Overlake, or not Overlake, sorry, the, what's it called? Like the Marymoor Village, like Bear Creek area. And so those are kind of like the different pockets that I kind of remember people talking about.
Yeah, I'm just going to maybe just build on that a little bit. There was definitely the conversation, do you want them to be the same, like Overlake and downtown or not? And that was a pretty good conversation, because almost everybody was like, no, we'd like them to be different, and how to think about that. I also think we were also quite surprised when Jeff was showing us the growth numbers over the next 30 years. We were like, wow, that's kind of a lot of people. How's that going to work? And then the density opportunities, like where does that density go? So I thought that was kind of interesting. The other thing I think is, if I remember, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong here, I think we had a conversation about, if you go to New York, there's the Flatiron Building, right? There's what used to be the Pan Am Chrysler Tower, whatever it's called now. You know, there were sort of anchor places you go, I'm here. Like, what is that in Redmond? Was, you know, I guess it goes back a bit to my question before, but you know, is there an anchor building? Is there something we should build that actually says this is Redmond? Or do we have something already where we actually want to build on that in terms of like, here's what Redmond downtown looks like? But there wasn't really this is sort of the anchor place to say this is Redmond, this particular spot. It's downtown, obviously, but is there a building that we could do that with? So.
Yeah, and I remember also like, I think part of the policies that were kind of spread out was there was like, you know, different policies talking about like building Native American, you know, kind of like art and like installations in each of the different neighborhoods, which I thought was interesting. But then it kind of also felt like we didn't want it to just be like, you know, for instance, when you go by Fred Meyer today, it just kind of feels like stuck into like a little, like, you know, it's like everything else around it is big box stores, and then there's just like this little piece. And so, you know, if there's like, you know, a way that we could build like a bigger park around it, or, you know, some kind of like, yeah, I don't know, like something more iconic, I guess, you know, to your point, yeah.
Thank you so much. That was a fantastic answer. So are there any other questions that have come up? All right. Well, I'll say thank you so much for this presentation and your incredible work over this time, and thanks to the entire committee for all this work, as well as the staff. And I'll pass it back to Director Helen.
I'm going to actually let it Singy and Adam can stay with us, or you can also not, if you choose not to. But I will hand the microphone over to Jeff again.
Thanks, Carol. We have a very brief presentation to introduce the 4 elements that Carol listed earlier. And what I would like the council to know is that we're kind of in the green ring here, where we're looking at second drafts of these elements. We looked at first drafts of these 4 elements and others back in September and October. The biggest thing that's new with these second drafts, as I'm sure you saw, is that there's narrative kind of wrapped around the policies, and we hope that makes it all feel a little bit more cohesive and answers many of the context questions you may have had with the first draft. Because with just the policies, sometimes things kind of feel like they come out of left field, but with the narrative, you can really introduce the concepts. So those are the big things. I'm going to turn it over to Glenn to introduce the 4 elements in turn, and then we'll turn it back over to you for discussion.
Hello, council members and mayor, and happy new year, and welcome to the new council members. Welcome, and look forward to working with you all. I'm Glenn Coyle, senior planner in the long range planning team. I'll provide an overview of updates to 4 of the sections or elements of the comp plan update. The first is the capital facilities element, which, just to provide a little background, provides information and policy direction on the city's existing facilities as well as planning for future facilities, including its financial planning and capital investment strategy. As this is a rather technical element of the comp plan, comments were limited and mainly focused on the technical terms used in the element and how these policies support Redmond 2050. The primary changes for the second draft include adding narrative text to the policies, including a vision statement, and updating levels of service standards related to functional plan updates, such as the park plan and the transportation master plan. Next slide. The utilities element provides policy direction for the planning and placement of utilities in Redmond, both city-owned, such as our water system, and private, such as energy and telecommunications. Comments and feedback received focus on how these policies could support more equitable service provision. Updates in the second draft include the narrative and vision statement, new framework policies for both city-owned and private utilities, as well as updates to the hazardous liquid pipeline section. Next section. The natural environment element contains policies on environmental stewardship, as well as policies on critical areas, including the CARA, wetlands, and other conservation areas. In addition, there are policies on tree canopy and noise and light pollution. Comments on this were minimal and were very supportive of the updates. Changes for the second draft include an updated narrative and vision statement. In addition, Section B, Environmentally Critical Areas, has been updated as part of the Critical Areas Regulations update, which is a separate but related planning process the city is currently working on. Lastly, the climate resilience and sustainability element is a new element which is intended to meet recently adopted state requirements for climate planning, as well as support the city's ongoing climate and greenhouse gas reduction efforts. And I would also just like to quickly note our environmental sustainability manager, Jenny Liebeck, is here if there are any additional questions or comments on this element. With that, in terms of feedback overall, I would say the response to this element has been very positive and that the community is excited that the city is moving forward on this ahead of state requirements to do so by 2029. We received a lot of great comments and suggestions, especially from the folks on the CNC who you just met. This is summarized on the slide. With this, we updated the second draft to include a vision statement and narrative, updated many of the proposed policies based on community feedback, and added 5 additional policies. So with that, that concludes my update, and happy to take any questions and comments.
Great. Are there questions from the council? Councilmember Stewart, kick us off.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, and Happy New Year. Great to be with you all. I did want to quickly just acknowledge the news that we also heard over the break from Director Helen that the final SEPA environmental review as part of Redmond 2050 was completed. So just wanted to thank and congratulate the entire team for their work on that. So thanks so much for introducing these elements. I had a couple of comments about just a couple of recurring things. And then I have a question about one of the utility policies, UT5. Is it okay if I ask that question? Okay. So a couple of my high-level things that I saw a couple of times are partners such as other levels of government, nonprofits, and private agencies were listed a few times. And I actually just got to wondering about the role of philanthropy, possibly adding philanthropy as a fourth partner in those opportunities, especially when it comes to availability of capital assets or future pieces of land, those kinds of things. And there was just one instance where the narrative did a really great job of introducing that our city serves up to 3 school districts, but there was one instance in CS 16 that still referred to just a singular district, so I just spotted that. But my question about UT5, which is on page 23 of attachment B, it had a change since we saw it last, and I guess I'll read it so that the public can hear it. But if a utility extension to a potential annexation area becomes necessary and immediate annexation is not possible, condition extension with an agreement to annex in a timely manner and an agreement to design the extension to city development standards. I wasn't super clear on what this meant, and I was just hoping that the council could have a chance to really make sure that we understand the implications of this one.
This ties into where I was kind of noting that the capital facilities and utilities elements can be a little technical, and a lot of it is intended to meet GMA requirements. I don't want to put anybody on the spot trying to explain, or Director Helen, for example, of exactly why that's worded that way. If you want to take a shot at it, if not, we can try to provide a more clearer answer. But a lot of it was really to kind of meet GMA and state requirements related to extending utilities outside of the growth, outside the, the urban growth boundary.
Sure.
Right. There's state law that actually limits the amount of urban levels of service that we can extend outside of our annexed areas of our city. So what this policy says is, for instance, if there were to be a system failure of some sort, somebody's septic field failed, or there was some environmental issue associated with utilities that are provided, that we could actually seek, basically, we could offer an exemption and allow that to extend and provide that extension with the condition that that area gets annexed into the city in a reasonable amount of time. Although that language is basically rooted in GMA and the provision of urban level service to rural areas.
Thank you. So the overarching implication that I want to make sure that we understand is that if the city, I want to make sure we understand, like at the 10,000 foot level, that this allows us to, if we step in, for instance, in the instance of septic failure or whatnot, if we step in, then yeah, we're going to help, but we're also going to annex you. Is that the implication?
So this would only apply in our, what is called a PAA, a potential annexation area. So it's a very limited area of our city where we still have regions at the edges. Union Hill is still an area. They're very small. There's some very small areas on the east side of the city. So it would only be in those cases where we would extend those levels of service in areas that were always anticipated to be annexed anyway.
Okay. Great, thank you. I understand it's technical and whatnot, but I do think that we don't talk about annexation very frequently, and so I just want to make sure we understood that.
Because, well, interestingly enough, there aren't very many annexation areas left, and you will be talking about annexation this year because we've received that petition for Rose Hill annexation.
I see, yes, okay.
So you'll get some additional grounding in that topic.
Okay. Since we're on super technical, if the chair will allow one more, UT 89 and 90, they are so highly prescriptive, naming the exact team that must be coordinated with. This is on page 37 of attachment B, and I just wondered if we could get some context as to why such a policy would be so specific to the Olympic Pipelines Damage Prevention Team.
Those updates were staff-driven, related to the Puget Sound Energy's Energize East Side project, and just some of how the layout related to these pipelines had been changed, like who we talk to or how we coordinate with, and that was kind of a staff-suggested update to those policies overall.
I can say a little bit about that as well. It was related to the environmental impact statement that was done for Energize East Side. I was actually the environmental coordinator in Bellevue when that happened. And we learned through that process that pipelines and the metal associated with pipelines actually corrode differently when exposed to some electromagnetic frequencies. And as a result, in certain soil types. So as a result, there was a very significant exploration of how we could ensure that the pipelines that were installed in the same corridor as the transmission lines that were installed in the same corridor as the pipelines were adequately separated and that had the right spill response, because these spill responses are highly technical and actually require response from airports. It's similar to creation of an airport fire or other things that could happen. So the specificity of this, in this case, is to ensure that beyond me being here, Glenn being here, Jeff being here, that there is this specific team that gets reached out to at Olympic Pipeline or at PSE to ensure that our emergency response is appropriate and construction is appropriate.
Thank you. And I would hope it would be highly technical because we would need that in that case. Olympic Pipeline is the entity then that it's not a state team or the pipeline is owned by Olympic Pipeline.
Correct.
That's why it is so specific. Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Great. Councilmember Nueva Camina.
Thank you. Director Helen, following up on Councilmember Stewart's question about the specificity of Olympic pipelines and understanding then if that organization is no longer together any longer, and we're talking about 30 years out, then I just want to confirm then we would need to do a code amendment to rename.
So since this was brought up, I was looking at that language, and we should probably have language in there that says, or its successor ownership. So we can track that without having to go back and amend the comprehensive plan, and we'll address that.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Councilmember Salahuddin.
Just want to start by saying thank you so much for putting this together, and I had a great time reading through it, so I really appreciate that. One thing that I noticed throughout the document, several instances of mentioning meeting the needs of underserved or overburdened communities, and really addressing how we can best serve those communities. And I do appreciate that some instances it is vague, so that we don't necessarily have to be tied to one specific course of action. However, there's a few times throughout the document, an analysis of how investments impact underserved communities. There was another one regarding the overburdened communities and how we need to address their needs. Is there a course of action that we have in mind to target those communities in Redmond, and would that be something that would be further detailed in this document?
Yeah, I'm going to Jeff actually participated with some of the creation with the county staff on development of some policies around that. Can you speak more to that, Jeff?
I'm not sure which county policies are you referring to, Karen?
I was thinking about the ones related to displacement and underserved populations and the work that we were asked to do. It was more specific to our affordable housing requirements, but the study that we are required to do in that context.
Yeah, so there's I think there are several prongs to this. So in the housing realm, we were required by countywide planning policies to investigate racially disparate impacts of housing policies in Redmond. And so we did that in 2023 with a grant from the State Department of Commerce in consultation with communities that have either been displaced or are at risk of displacement from Redmond. And that also included a lot of historical research into housing policies in Redmond and what they actually have been. I think you will find I know you will find language like that in several places in the plan. And so you're not looking at housing tonight, so I know you found it somewhere else that wasn't in the housing element. And I think the response is really depends on what the topic is. So for example, in the case of climate resilience and sustainability, for example, we conducted a climate vulnerability assessment in 2022. As part of the environmental work, and it was already planned to be done, but we were able to align it with the environmental review process for Redmond 2050 so that we could understand who our vulnerable communities are in Redmond vis-a-vis climate resilience and sustainability, and include that information in the environmental impact statement so that community members in the city council could have that information at hand when making decisions about how growth should occur in Redmond. So those are two examples of how those kinds of processes occur and what they can look like, but it will just depend on kind of what the topic is, kind of what it looks like. So I'd say broadly.
And then just one other comment, Councilmember Salahuddin. other things that we've been doing is with grants and other outreach, we've been using language translation. I know that Jeff and his team are hosting an event later this month that is an immersive Spanish-speaking event. So people who have generally been maybe had not have as much access to the process are getting greater attention.
Absolutely, and I really appreciate both of your answers. I think I mean Redmond is not short of serving the communities that are most in need, and I really appreciate including that language so that we can actually move forward in that regard.
Thanks for that great question. I will follow up on that. I know that I think the last time we saw these drafts, especially around the community design element, we were just about to work with Eastside for All to be able to convene some of those discussions. I got to go to that really great community discussion at the Together Center, and I know they've just been doing all that engagement work. I assume some of that input is we're seeing here in these drafts. Can you share a little bit about what some of the changes that are showing up in here came out of those conversations? What were some of the top line takeaways from there that are now in our comp plan drafts?
Sure. If I may ask that we defer the community design question until the 23rd, and then we'll have the staff experts for that with us, because so much of that input was related to community design, and I want to give it a fair shake.
There's been less feedback, as Glenn noted, on things like the utilities element and the capital facilities element, because they can be a little bit arcane. So the public has really dug into things like housing and the environment and the community design section, which is new.
Got it. So we're going to talk about that on the 23rd. Very helpful for scoping. Can you actually, Director Helen, clarify for us, just for the rest of this conversation, which elements we should really focus our questions on tonight versus the 23rd?
So tonight is utilities, capital facilities, climate resiliency, and sustainability. And natural environment.
Got it. Okay. I thought the community design was included, so appreciate that. Are there other questions from the council? Councilmember Fields.
Okay, I'm going to stick with the topic. So 6 years ago when I came on council, I brought the concerns that I had learned at my previous job on sustainability. I think we were calling it climate change at the time. We might have been calling it global warming, I can't remember. And the city, and I pushed very hard that previous mayor and the council, and then the subsequent councils on an emergency, declaring an emergency, a climate emergency, and sustainability plans, getting resources in-house to help us. And I think the city has made great progress. But I'm basically still concerned, and I'm somewhat of an impatient person. And we understand the problems, and we understand the potential of things that could happen to us, to a lot of communities, but right now we're focused on Redmond. And I was glad to hear that the community, I can't remember who had mentioned it, that the community was supportive and excited that we were out ahead of state requirements and we were somewhat leaders in this area. What I would like to see, if it's possible, is a somewhat of a if-then analysis, meaning sort of a model that says if some of the things that we anticipate happen, here's what the city would consider doing. Because I know that it's an uphill battle to get our developer community to understand the need as some of us see it, I won't say we, as some of us see it, for green roofs, more energy efficiency, and we're trying to incentivize a lot of those changes. But what I would like to see is that we actually understand that if we're going to mitigate the impacts of climate change, that we know what that means, and that we will lay down the the choices and the decisions that future councils and future administrations may need to consider. Look at those now and prepare for the eventuality. Is that kind of analysis possible?
It's a good question.
I don't know if it's a good question, but it's a burning question for me.
So I'm just rereading your question really quick to make sure. I think I don't know that it's possible. I think, the best way right now that we analyze the impact of our actions is through what's called a wedge analysis, which was included in our plan. It sounds like you're asking, if I'm understanding your question correctly, for more of a trigger. So if we're not meeting our goals, I just also want to make sure I understand fully what you're requesting, that there's some sort of kind of trigger that helps us know we need to insert more actions. Is that?
That's right, but it's not about meeting our goals. My read of this is the unpredictability. I read, and who knows? I read, I pay attention, and a lot of the experts in this area are saying, "Oh, here's a new consequence, and it's happening sooner than we thought, and we are still behind." So I don't think that I don't think any of us have the ability to say, here's what we can do to solve this problem. But we can lay out possibilities or scenarios, scenario planning, and say, if certain things begin to happen in Redmond, like additional heat, what did they call that thing when the heat globe came on us?
Heat dome?
Yeah, heat dome. What are our actions? What would we do to protect the community? What would we do to change the long-term decisions or planning? And obviously, flooding is a possibility. So, and wildfires. I don't know what I don't want to go into this dire string of possibilities, but that is, in fact, you have it right, only it's not that we're not achieving our goals, it's what happens when the goalposts move.
Yeah, that helps a lot. Thanks for clarifying. I think, so one of the things that both our policies do within the comp plan update, as well as our plan, or ESAP, our plan itself does, is that we commit to updating our plan every 5 years. And it's to recognize exactly what you're saying, is that technology changes, we have new tools in the toolbox, our conditions change. So recognizing that, we don't adopt a plan and then that's our plan for 30 years. So I'd say that is absolutely our best mechanism. We'll be starting the process again to update a plan that we just adopted. We'll be starting that next year in 2025. And we do, again, lay that foundation within the policies here in this element too for that.
And it's the foundation that I'm interested in. It's not waiting the 5 years and say, oh, let's have a look, everything's changed. How could we have seen that coming? I want to be able to be in a position where we do see those things coming, and that when that time frame comes around, we're prepared to actually, make the mitigation and make the improvements. So I appreciate that. Actually, that is a very good answer, so thank you.
I think it's also important to acknowledge all the work that Jenny and others have done to contribute to data collection and monitoring. So those will allow us to start identifying trends early as well. So in addition to 5-year update, if we start identifying trends from the baseline as we get farther out, obviously we'll have the benefit of more information, more data points that we can link together and adaptively manage sooner than we might need to if the 5-year plan is going to be too far out.
Thank you. Council Vice President Forsyth?
Thank you. Along the same conversation, along the same lines, we understand that we can't do this work alone and this sustainability effort alone. I didn't see, and can you illuminate for me where in the policy we recognize the need for the regional efforts on this front and how we're addressing that?
we're looking through it really quick. Sorry, one second. Yeah, so it's actually one of our, Glenn mentioned the formatting piece. It's one of our framework policies, actually, around developing partnerships and programs to rapidly and equitably reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Because to your point, we know this work is not done in isolation. We absolutely need to be relying on our both local, regional, statewide partners to get this work done.
Okay, I'm wondering if there's potentially a bit more language we can add. And I don't know what that looks like, but I'll give it some thought. Thank you.
Councilmember Anderson?
Thank you. And I appreciate the comments Director Helen and Ms. Leibach have given on sort of the overall tracking and data collection idea. One thing I didn't see specifically outlined in the policy, and this may not be the proper place for it, but the concept of being able to tie some of these policy measures to dollars. And one way to do that is through our insurance policy, especially when it comes to climate vulnerability. So I wanted to make sure there's some room in this, maybe at the table right now, or just in some of our procedural discussions about what we are tracking, and then to make sure that we can look back on our pretty substantial ESAP plan and say, hey, you know, this ended up saving us some money, and we can talk to our community members about what that looks like. So there's plenty of resources here in the city, including Hank Margison, just as an example of somebody who may have some ideas on that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you have your hand up? Oh. Do any other council members have any questions? All right, then I'll go, and if anyone thinks of any, feel free to go as a second round. Otherwise, we can close off after this. So I guess for me, appreciate all the conversation on this. One thing I wanted to note about the natural environment element, well, actually, one thing I'll note first about the climate element is I really loved the vision statement. There were some parts of it where I just wanted to live in that Redmond. It was so exciting where all of Redmond is solar powered and where every single home has a heat pump. I loved that idea. Although I did wonder with that is I love that that's kind of the goal we're even moving towards today and imagining having the whole city electrified. I don't know if in 2050 heat pumps will be outdated at that point, but hopefully they'll last a good amount of time. I would say I think one of my thoughts looking at the natural environment element in the vision statement is that I think it could be a little bit more specific in some ways like we see actually in the climate element. In particular, the first sentence, it leads with Redmond in 2050 has maintained a green character, which I think that's just a little amorphous for what it is that we're really aiming towards. What does it mean to have a green character in Redmond? I was thinking, maybe it's something a little bit more like in 2050, Redmond has protected and stewarded its critical habitat and ensured that all residents have access to green outdoor spaces to promote a high quality of life or something like that, right? It's like, what do we mean when we say green character? For me, it means that everyone in Redmond could easily walk and have access to some sort of green space, which I think shows up a little bit more in some of the policies, but I'd love in that initial vision that we have to see it a little more specifically spelled out there. So that was just a thought that I had on that piece and in a few parts, I think, of the natural environment of just being like a little bit more specific. Any other comments? All right, well, this was a great conversation. Director Helen, can you remind us of the next steps? I know we have another study session that will be coming up on this and to prepare council members for that discussion.
Yes, we do. We do have a study session scheduled for the
23rd.
23rd.
January 23rd.
Get my agenda memo back up here.
We'll be looking at community design, land use, and participation. So it should be a great conversation. And those are all in your packet for tonight. So you have all the information.
Great, thank you very much. And as a reminder, since at that point, then they'll be heading back to kind of do the final piece on the drafts before we see them one more time for council members, I'd say let's all think of, in 2 weeks from now, the opportunity to really each bring our thoughts on the core questions that were posed tonight of, you know, are you seeing input for those who've given input in the past reflected in these drafts? Do we feel like they're on the right track? And is there anything missing? Because it's really our opportunity with these study sessions to be able to give this input and then hopefully that guidance for that final piece of the process. So I'll probably do a little round of questions in the next study session, but knowing we have one more bite at the apple, we won't do that tonight.
That would be great. As you noted, we will be, after these second set of drafts, remember we said we would pursue kind of, for the new council members, we said we were going to pursue a process similar to the one we used for the budget, where we would see these last kind of second rounds of drafts, and then we would kind of put those aside, and then the next time you will see it all together in a single draft so that you can see any cross connections and tensions that we might not have addressed when we saw it on an element by element basis.
Yeah, thank you very much. And just a reminder to new council members or all council members that in the next 2 weeks before we have that discussion, if you have further detailed questions, if you want to go over your notes on page 265, as I like to do, you know, feel free to reach out to our really capable staff and schedule a meeting with them. I'm sure they would love to be able to talk with you about it.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, thank you. We'll close out this item and move on to the next.
Thank you so much. Have a good evening.
Thank you, and good evening.
Yes. We will take a 5-minute recess and we will return at 8:17. Thank you.
And you're back on.
Thank you. And we are back. The next item on the agenda is the Southeast Redmond Park Master Plan update. Presenting today is Laureen Hamilton, our Parks and Recreation Director, and she will introduce this item.
Good evening. I'm Laureen Hamilton, the Parks and Recreation Director. I am joined this evening by our Parks Planning Manager, Caroline Chapman, and we are here to present the Southeast Redmond Neighborhood Park Master Plan update for City Council, and we are joined by our consultants from Berger Partnership. And so I'm going to hand it over to Caroline Chapman so she can introduce our guests and also give a little more background, particularly for any new council members that we might have.
Thank you, Laureen. And yes, to the new council members, I'm Caroline Chapman. Very nice to see you both here. So we are going to be talking about the Southeast Redmond Neighborhood Park this evening. And the master plan is really the first step in getting to a place for design and development of this park. And the neighborhood park is about 3 acres, roughly the size of Anderson Park in downtown. It's part of the growing Woodbridge and Woodside neighborhood near Cadman Gravel, Costco, and also the Redmond Hill Apartments. As part of our recently adopted park plan, we have a goal within that to have all residents be within a half-mile walk of a public park. And during that process, we found that the Southeast Redmond neighborhood is currently underserved compared to some of our other neighborhoods in Redmond. And bringing this park online would go a long way in increasing our level of service, particularly in the growing Southeast Redmond neighborhood. Within the park plan, we also lay out the intent of neighborhood parks, and we'll speak to that this evening, but the types of amenities that are typically found in a neighborhood park and the drive for that is really to serve the immediate neighborhood, and you won't see things like rentable picnic shelters or large sports fields that would really act as a magnet to draw folks to this neighborhood area. But we've been really lucky in this process to have great community feedback, and you'll see that reflected within these concepts. And part of the development of that draft preferred plan. So tonight, we'd like you to review this feedback, those concepts, and also it's your opportunity to really provide input on the preferred draft before we bring forward a final master plan this spring. So with that, I will hand it over to Jordan and Guy with Berger Partnership.
Gotta get my mic. I'll be AV guy. Perfect. All right, thanks everyone. My name is Jordan Zlatoff. I'm with Berger Partnership. We are landscape architects and we worked on this project. Do you want to introduce yourself as well, Guy?
I'm Guy Michelson, also with the Berger Partnership, and with some nice Redmond roots, having worked here before on the Redmond Central Connector and a bunch of other super cool projects.
All right, so yeah, we are super excited to be here and working on this project. This first graphic that we're showing here is just a overview slide to show the overall process of the master plan project that we're working on. We've been working on this project since about July, August, and of 2023. And so where we're at right now, we've had 2 public meetings so far, and we've gone through a process of kind of some alternate concepts plans, and now we're honing in on number 4 here. Our final preferred plan is our next milestone that we're working towards. So what you're going to see today is the draft preferred plan. So that's where we're at right now in the process and looking to finish up in the next month or 2 here. And so here's some photos. We started out with a public meeting originally to, yes, initial public meeting was to gather input before we did design work and really kind of share site analysis and kind of programming and activity ideas with the public. And so we had a great meeting on site, lots of families, lots of kids, lots of feedback. You can see some of the photos here. There may have been some voter fraud with extra dots being handed out. And so there's a lot of fun was had in the meeting, but we also got a lot of great feedback, and it was really positive.
Okay, I'm here for color commentary, and I just want to say it was like one of my favorite public meetings ever, because we aspire to get A, people, and then B, to get a diverse mix of people, and then C, to get youth, because we never get youth, and then D, to get teenagers, because they're like the non-existent population for parks. I mean, meaning they're one of the biggest user groups, but you just can't reach them, and then unfortunately I think a lot of more mature in age people sort of write off teens as juvenile delinquents. And it was just the best meeting, and we got the best input, and it was so fun. And it was great. Like the end, in particular, really strong advocacy for that teen group, acknowledging that teens need a really cool place to be. And it was wonderful.
Yeah, so we took all the the DOT exercises, and we also had an online questionnaire and a questionnaire that was handed out in person at the public meeting. We got lots of great input to take us to the next step. I'm not going to read all this stuff directly, but I think some of the main themes that really stood out from the feedback that we got was people were really excited about a space that felt like a getaway in a sense from the sort of more urban context of the site, and really felt natural and
Hey, you want to sleep your little update there?
excuse that. All right. And so that was one theme, and another one that Guy was just alluding to was a place that really served all ages. That was a really big comment that we heard from a number of people. So all, young kids up through teens and older people as well. And so a lot of community members were excited about that. And this is kind of just going through the kind of quantification, if you will, of the public input that we got, which you're welcome to kind of dig into more, but for the sake of time, I'm not going to get into too much detail here. But we, like I said, lots of great feedback and useful information that we used in developing our next round of design concepts.
I have to chime in, which is the city of Redmond did this really cool exhibit welcoming people to, and when I see that, I mean the amazing city staff did this amazing cool handout for people to sort of draw what they wanted in their park, and they did a shape of the park, and we got really, really cool feedback, again, especially from kids, and then adults pretending to be kids to try to get their input, more value, but it was really cool.
All right, so yeah, this is like a very high level kind of overview just to kind of describe the process of how we take that input that we get from the initial public meeting, and then the next step that we go to is to develop 3 different concept alternatives that start to explore the different activities and ideas that we're coming up with based on these things, and then those kind of get synthesized into the preferred plan. And so it's not that we're necessarily picking one or the other of these options. It's kind of sharing that back to the community, hearing their response, getting input, and then synthesizing that into the preferred plan option that we're also going to show you today. And my computer will catch up. There we go. So as we started to delve into concept design, we just wanted to share a few of our core kind of leading design principles that helped us organize our approach. And so first one on the top left here is just that we felt like the heart, if you will, the main gathering space of the park wanted to be really kind of centered within the space. The west edge is along a pretty busy street, so we wanted to stay buffered from that. And then kind of the main community is to the south and the east, and so we felt like the heart of the site wanted to be there in the middle. And there's also a note on there about the vegetated buffer along the north edge, which we felt like was an important element to kind of frame the park from the development that is being planned on the property to the north. So the next one on the top right here, you see rewilding. So that really means like bringing back, this site right now, if you look at it, it's basically just a big open grass field, and we felt it was really important to bring back some nature, bring back some trees, the canopy, the shade, the sort of feeling that you get from kind of being within that environment, and that was something that was really supported by the community's feedback as well. And regional connectivity, making sure we're kind of working within the framework of the overall region and context of connections and trails and things like that. And then also just kind of making sure that we're seeing the connections to the immediate neighborhood that you see on the bottom right there, all the crosswalks and major connections there. And so this is the first of our concept alternatives that we prepared. We called it Contemporary Promenade. It was sort of focused around this main promenade along the south edge. I'm not going to go into too much detail on the three concepts, but you'll see that we synthesize some of these main elements into the final preferred concept. So this is the first one, Contemporary Promenade. And then the second concept was called The Wilds. It was, a more informal take on kind of the path network and geometries, and just a little bit more loose kind of approach to laying out the park, and with that big central playground area. And one of the really kind of important elements that we ended up getting really excited about in the park design was incorporated into this concept, which we called Sunset Hill. And we were just really excited to kind of get this idea that actually came out of some comments that we got during the initial public meeting from the public. So it was like able to translate that directly into sort of our design here, and we all just got really excited about it. And so that's showing up in this concept here. And the third concept alternative here is called Threads, also known as Friendship Bracelet. And so this one really was organized around two sort of intertwining paths, if you will, that work their way through the park and frame different spaces and create little pods of gathering.
All right, this is time for my line, which we were doing this work around the time of the Taylor Swift shows in Seattle. So we had friendship bracelets on the brain.
Okay, so those were the three concepts. And as I said, we presented those to the community and got great feedback in our second public meeting. We then took that feedback and started to hone that into one preferred concept. Some of the key elements that we took from each of the three are listed here. So on design concept one, we wanted to kind of incorporate that promenade idea. We felt that had good merit and got good reception. The nice flexible play space for teens and wheels that you see on the right side of that one, lots of natural planting. And then concept two, which was kind of the most preferred and most well kind of received, and one that we were all really excited about, became kind of the core kind of framework of the park that we started to develop into the preferred plan. You can see the Sunset Hill, the variety of circulation options, the arrangement of features, the large gathering and playground area, and the natural stormwater play opportunities were all components that we were really excited to carry forward. And design concept three was, there was just general circulation, the intertwining paths, the fun playground with some topography elements. The community garden was something that people were excited about, and the large flexible play space for teens, similar to the first concept. So once my computer catches up.
Big reveal. Hey.
So yeah, here's the draft preferred plan that we've developed from all the feedback and design work that we've been doing. And this is kind of representing where we're at this point in the project. And I'm going to go into different areas in more detail. So I'm not going to try to talk to each thing on the plan here, but you can see a lot of the elements probably that were in the wilds concept are showing up here. And what we also do in addition to kind of bringing elements from each different option, we're trying to make sure the spaces are more realistically sized and right sized for kind of the scale of people and the scale of the playground features and the scale of the path widths and things like that are much more accurately represented as we get into this iteration of the plan. And so you got some? I'm going to keep going.
I'll save it.
All right. So one of the big kind of leading core principles you can see here on the left, I was kind of alluding to this earlier. You got the big grassy open existing site, and we felt we're really inspired to bring back some natural elements and understory planting and pollinator plants and sort of the stormwater element. These were all big sort of inspirations for us as we started to develop the design.
Can you go back a slide?
Yeah.
It worked better with you doing that. That's great. I think one of the big things when we look at the overall plan that's going to come back up here in a minute is just sort of some big moves. And you saw it on the kind of that park functionality drawing. But in essence, the rewilding is like saying, you know what, the whole north half-ish wants to be wild. If you look to the east from this site, you can, we know that this is up on a shelf, and then it drops down to Evans Creek and the wetlands there, and it goes up to this beautiful wooded hill. And I keep saying, I don't know if that's Novelty Hill. Does anyone know, is that still Novelty Hill that far south? Okay, so Novelty Hill. And then we know that to the west is Marymore Park. Union Hill. I don't know, anyways, cool. Union Hill, so I totally was wrong. But anyways, there's that kind of cool wooded ridge line, Evans Creek, and it's sort of, then there's the more, this is a quirky neighborhood because it has both neighborhoods, single-family residences, apartments, and then to the north of our site is really unique because it has a lot of light industrial and industrial uses. And right now it's this blank slate of lawn, so we love thinking of this as this really important sort of lily pad of ecology between Union Hill, some would say Novelty Hill, I don't know why, Union Hill and Lake Sammamish. And so just kind of bringing some of that more northwest ecology in, we think is really important. But the other big thing that's happening here is right now this site, well, it drops from west to east like 8 feet. That's a great asset for us to use to move drainage east from west to east. It's pretty flat south to north, slight slope. If you ever walk out there in the winter, super boggy. So I think a big part of the overall scheme is the idea that we're going to embrace that south edge, the big trees that are there, the sidewalk. It gives us like instant park character. It's part of the circulation, but then excavate down, which helps create a little bit of a buffer there, and berm at the field, but take that fill and put it on the north side. So those are kind of the two big moves we're making, is that if you look at it right now, it's a seemingly very flat site, but we're actually creating a lot of topography out of this. So we're creating a new uplands, and that upland is what's occupied by the rewilding.
Okay, so I'm going to kind of zoom in on a few areas here just to talk in more detail. So first area that we are showing here is the Sunset Hill and Perch. And so, like I said earlier, this was an idea that came out of some comments from the first public meeting, and we were so excited about it and ran with it. And so the idea is just to get a big hillside into the park that people can kind of use as a gathering space, as a space to watch the sunset, as a space to do some sledding if it snows someday, and have an accessible pathway to the top. And so it has you can see the accessible path kind of winding around here, getting you to the top. And then once you get up there, there is a sort of a nice, generous paved gathering space that people can hang out at. And one of the comments that came up in some of the meetings was that people were concerned that, it might be just big enough for like one group of people or a couple people to kind of monopolize. So we really made an effort to make that space feel generous. And I think it's like 30 feet wide, that paved area at the top. And so it's a good sized spot that, a few different groups of people could occupy and hang out comfortably.
And I think a quick thing here is we love that term perch. People love height. And again, we thought particularly sort of for that target teen group is being up. People love elevation. And then even whatever we put on there, there's some images off to the side. We don't want to put swings up there. I think it'd be super cool. It'd probably break every sort of playground code on the planet. It'd be really fun to launch yourself off of, and therefore we didn't want that to happen. But the idea that you're actually, when you're up there, whether it's hammocks or these little round things, they're not swinging, they're fixed. But even then, you're perched, and we can have them at 3 different elevations. Maybe some you have to climb into, some are down at a nice level, so that if you're in a wheelchair or something, you can kind of transfer onto them and still get that same experience. But there's this idea of being perched and having a little bit of movement without it being a swing. So even you can imagine how different that is if it was like, I'm going to go to the top of a hill and sit on a hardwood bench. Just kind of taking that idea of perch a little further.
All right, and so here you can see we wanted to study, what we could actually achieve with the grades and, maintaining ADA accessibility to the top and working within the site context. So this is a 2-scale cross-section cutting through the hillside and through the edge of the park there. And sorry if I forgot to point out, so the hill itself was 22 feet above kind of the lower portion of the park there. So it's a good, it's a good size. It's not a huge mountain by any means, but it is a nice feeling, good, generous hillside. So next area to focus in on, here's the central playground and gathering space. One of the concepts that we were trying to really embrace here was the main hangout area with the covered canopy is really integrated seamlessly with the playground space, and so it feels like one large gathering area. People can kind of move around and circulate through that. We got some really fun, exciting playground stuff. We've got zip lines, some swings. We've got play equipment areas for, smaller kids, 2 to 5, plus another one for the 5 through 12 kind of age group, and also this really fun slide area that's built into kind of the edge of the Sunset Hill to take advantage of some of the top topography that we're getting out of that, and you can access that from our ADA accessible path or some stairs or just climbing up, as you can kind of see on the image in the bottom right here, kind of just scrambling up the edge of the hill. And the other element that we wanted to highlight here is you can see where the number 1 is on the plan. We're proposing a very sort of open and higher feeling canopy in this park. So it's one of the ideas being that, a lot of times you'll see these canopies or shelters that are lower and feel kind of smaller, and it's more like you can kind of occupy that as like one family is in there, and you can't, the other people can't feel like they can't also be part of that or be under there. So we wanted it to be really open, a little bit more generous sized, some like more informal seating elements that you can kind of see in those guitar pick shaped image. Seating benches, so it's really a playful kind of fun place that's part of the playground area, and a lot of people can enjoy at the same time. Next area, here's the flexible play and teen hang, and so Yeah, the goal here is just to provide some open paved areas that can be used very informally and in different ways. People can do rollerblading, you could have a skateboard, you could be playing basketball. It's not intended to be a formal basketball court, more just like somewhere with some hoops that people can play around at. You've also got a smaller space that's envisioned as a pickleball court. One of the ideas that we incorporated was that each of these different spaces, you've got the playground itself, which is off to the left here, kind of cut off, but then the basketball area and the pickleball court area are kind of interspersed in between with very intentional planting buffers. So you have kind of these individual spaces that can be used and occupied and feel sort of framed around by the vegetation there. You can see the image in the bottom middle there with some step seating that is adjacent to the main kind of paved basketball / play area. So kids hanging out there, just space that can be used in a lot of different ways. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to add, one of the things that we heard through the public is there is always questions of, I don't even think concerns is the right word, but questions regarding noise and courts. And so one of the things we've done here is with that topography we've talked about, plus the vegetation, is they're sort of nestled in to deaden as much of the noise as possible from the pickleball court or a bouncing basketball. And anyways, and I should point out that sort of the speckled walk, why don't you show them where the promenade kind of meanders by here? Like you can see that there with where he's running his mouse, but that's our promenade, and it's just a nice passage of spaces as you move through there, we think.
All right. So yeah, and then this is just a sketch showing kind of the sort of whole picture put together with the Sunset Hill and the playground elements incorporated on the hillside there. Some slides and play features. You got the basketball / wheels hangout space in the foreground there, the pickleball court on the right side. And yeah, we're just really excited about kind of how all these elements are coming together, and we feel like it's going to be just an amazing space for the community. One other area of the park that we wanted to show as well and not forget is the more western portion of the park. This is where we've located kind of the generous lawn area that you can see here. It's about 225 feet long, but it's fairly, it's more narrow, and so it's flexible space that can be used for informal games, but it's not intended to be like a formalized soccer field or anything like that. And then you will notice where we have the number 5 here, we did put a little bermed buffer to the street to kind of keep balls into the play area or into the grass area, and just kind of as a informal buffer, if you will, to frame that edge. And then the other big thing that you're seeing here over on the west edge on the north is number 3. We were able to fit sort of small, modest community garden space into this portion of the park as well.
One thing well, you can keep it where it's at, that's fine. But one of the things that, again, that grading that we talked about, kind of hunkering the courts down in, and the same thing applies to this lawn here, is we deliberately wanted to do this without any fences that were required to sort of break up the park to contain things. So we're using grading to do that instead.
All right, and so, yeah, this last graphic is then just kind of, taking a look back out the edges of the park, thinking about how we sort of referencing that previous diagram, we want to make sure that we're connecting to the community around it. So these are just some opportunities that we wanted to make sure we highlight for improving crosswalks where there are some existing already, but there's also a number that aren't existing and should probably be added to make sure there's safe crossings around the park itself. We're also noting that you could potentially have some connections to the development once that becomes developed to the north, the property. There could be connections to the parking lot or the the space on the north there, I think makes sense. And also connecting to the south where there's an existing small kind of playground within the community there off the page to the south. And with that, I will bring up the main overall plan again, and we can have some discussion. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
And there's two things that I wanted to touch on really quickly. The first is that we will be having a community meeting sharing this same information at RCCMV, the Redmond Community Center at Marymoor Village on January 31st at 5:30, and that'll have a hybrid option. Council members are invited to attend if you would like to join us for that. And I just also want to touch on that this is a really great example of how we are using the recently adopted park plan and all of that feedback that we got from the community over the past 2 years in how we are going to incorporate that into our future parks and having, high needed amenities or things that people really wanted to see, like the community gardens, and also feedback that we got from this council about having integrated play and play for all ages and an opportunity for folks to really get out and engage in the play spaces at our parks. So we're really thrilled with the work that Berger has done incorporating all of that.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for the great presentation and great work. This is really exciting. So looking forward to this discussion. Council members, comments, questions? Councilmember Anderson.
I'll second that. Wonderful presentation, and I loved hearing the stories about the park. And you got to my final question, or my question at the final slide, which was about the connections to future development. So thank you for that. Curious if this is maybe a question for Lorene, I should say Director Hamilton. Will the cost of the future connections be incorporated into this? Because if we're investing a good amount of money into the development of a new park, my projection brain thinks about what future money will we need to be also investing to make some of these connections going forward with these other developments in the area.
Yeah, that's a really great question that I don't think we have an answer for quite yet. After we have the master plan adopted, we'll be able to start to look a little bit more at what it might actually cost. We're not quite there yet, but we do have every intention of doing as much of that work as we can within that. But then we can always partner with our good friends in Public Works and transportation to make sure that we're able to do the best that we can for this community, because that was one of the things that came up early on in this project and was actually one of the reasons that we hired Berger, was because they were one of the only consultants in their interview to discuss accessing this park in such a busy area and how it can lack safety because of that. So the short answer is we're not there yet. And that would be the hope if resources allow it.
Thank you. And then can you clarify just the timing of what the next door neighbors and the development of this potential park might look like? Construction
That
at the same
is
time? Or?
The Redmond Flex. I believe it has come forward to council, but we can find out their timeline and get back to you on that.
Do you know if this development will be taking place prior to the park being developed?
It depends if this park is budgeted and part of the CIP.
I think you're talking to the right people about that. So thank you.
Our intention is for this park to be the next park that we develop within our park plan. So there's a lot of different capital needs and capital projects that are coming down the pike. Some of those are facilities, but in the parks, very formal parks realm, this is the next kind of major priority for us, is to build out this master planned park. So the goal would hopefully be within the next, 2 to 4 year CIP that we would be able to look towards development of this park.
And then the next door neighbors are happening when?
I don't know the answer to that. Carol, do you?
When is Redmond
Redmond
Flex?
Flex.
Yeah, planning.
Sorry.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
That one has been through your council process. You had the quasi-judicial hearing, and it's through, basically, they're proceeding through building permit, but environmental, the financing conditions aren't very good right now, so I think that they were also trying to get all of their permits wrapped up, and that in the immediate future, they don't have plans to move forward quickly, but they are being diligent.
Are we like 2025, 2026? Just looking for.
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Councilmember Salahuddin.
I have a couple of questions, but first of all, I just want to say thank you so much. This is incredible, and I wish I had a park like this growing up. Redmond has some incredible parks, but this really encompasses everything, and I appreciate the level of extent you did with the community meetings and seeing all of those languages and different cultures represented and reflecting that into this. I'm thinking about my own background, and people from my background would go to a park like this. So it's just great to see. One question that I had was around the parking. And I know that, so many developments, so many houses near this area, near this park, which would provide an easy walking access, and hopefully a lot of the neighbors there use it. I'm also anticipating that a lot of folks would come to this park from elsewhere. Is there consideration that the neighborhoods might be inundated with a lot of cars, and any solutions to that?
This is one of the consistent conversations that we have around the difference between our neighborhood parks and our community parks. And so for us, neighborhood parks do not usually include additional parking because they really are intended to serve the immediate area. That being said, there is a decent amount of on-street parking on that street there. But it has been a part of our conversation as we've looked at this master plan. It has been a concern of the community. But at this time, we are not planning to add additional parking. And in part, it's because the more parking we put on site, the less park we get. And so it is a constant struggle, especially when you look to build such a really cool neighborhood park. And it's actually a struggle that we've seen up at Westside Park. So that's our other most recently redeveloped neighborhood park, and it's very cool. And it's been in a lot of actually like parenting magazines, and like Parent Map has featured it a few times, and that neighborhood has seen a pretty significant inundation. But we actually, after it kind of grand opened, and then the really intense like excitement around it died down, we've had far less complaints from the neighborhood around parking. So I think it may peak, and then I think it'll fall a little bit as people fall into a rhythm of not driving across Redmond to go to one single park.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And then just the other really quick, not really a question, but just a consideration is, the community garden is a great idea to put into this park. And I've spoken with the Indian American Community Services and some members of that organization who, a lot of them don't speak English. And so if there is any consideration of putting language translations, allowing for that, just specifically in the community garden, but maybe throughout the park as well, I think that would be really nice.
Councilmember Nueva Camina.
First, I want to go to this park. I want to go hang out at this park. Raising throughout the years 4 children, and knowing that they would definitely have loved it as small children, as well as through adolescence. I still have one teenager left at home, and I know that he talks about wanting more spaces for him and his friends in Redmond to go hang out at. And I know that he would absolutely love this park. I have it on my goal to learn how to play pickleball this year, because apparently that's what we do in Redmond. And I'm also well aware that the longer the time that I spend at this park, the more I'm going to need to use the restroom, and I don't see one here. And I know that how important that is to families with young children, as well as a myriad of families of varying abilities, and being able to have that accessibility. And I don't see one here, so I did not want to make an assumption and ask, is that in the plan?
I'll take a crack at it, but then you can add in, because that too is sort of similar to parking, which is, well, what is a neighborhood park? Because traditionally neighborhood parks don't have restrooms, but you're also right, there is also a reality. And so in this instance, if you were to look, one of our numbers, is it number, I can't see it, 10, 19, I can't read. Oh, it's too small and my eyes are terrible. But we've actually identified, and this sounds like not super sexy and exciting, is a spot for potential honey bucket. But the reason why we did that is we thought really legitimately about how would this work operationally so that it could be easily maintained, easily managed, fully visible. And what we would recommend is that we actually do an enclosure for it, which actually makes it more secure. So A, it's less attractive, it doesn't stand out in the beautiful natural colors that they are usually plasticed in, but also that it can't be tipped over and be such an attractive nuisance. So A, we've accounted for that, and B, long-term, this is actually a pretty well utilitied site. We have water to it. We have, clearly there's sanitary sewer. And so one of the things that our civil engineer is going to do is sort of identify, if you were to ever do a master or a restroom, this is where you do it. But again, that's beyond where you typically would do that. And I'll defer to you to sort of talk about citywide thinking.
Yeah, you touched on it. It's very similar to parking. Our neighborhood parks they don't usually have restrooms, and in part it's because our system and our staffing in part cannot manage restrooms at all of our parks. They have to be maintained, they have to be cleaned, and we also deal with a fair amount of graffiti in a lot of our restrooms. And so the more restrooms that we have, the more resources it pulls. But the other piece of it is that comes down to a classification of park that this one is not. It's considered a neighborhood park. It is always a source of differing opinions on if we should or should not. So we definitely are looking at having some considerations in, were there ever to be the need to put a restroom in here. But we have, I cannot think of many neighborhood parks that we have restrooms in for those reasons.
And completely appreciate that. And it was actually seeing a pickleball court there and understanding the length of time that it would take to, and understanding how much time am I going to be spending there?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And it's part of our hope, actually, and this is within the park plan, is to put amenities throughout our system so that people aren't traveling really far to go to those amenities, right? So the hope would actually be that we have pickleball throughout our system in a way that you're not having to go across town and be there for 3 hours to play pickleball, but there's one relatively easily accessible to your home or your place of work. So that is one of our goals and visions as well, is to create these spaces so frequently throughout the city that you're not having to traverse really far. And then there are pickleball courts at some of our major parks, like Perigo, for example, which does have restrooms, or the Redmond Senior and Community Center also has restrooms. So yeah, I hope that helps.
Councilmember Fields.
First, glad to hear our Parks Director acknowledge the impact of one park impacts all the other parks. And like if we put a parking and bathroom facilities here, then everybody else is going to demand the same thing. So that's not my question. My question, and I went along really well with this presentation, but there was something nagging at me, like something missing. And then you got to this final slide, and I saw again draft preferred plan, and then someone mentioned that we're going to give this to the neighborhood on January 30 something, and then I realized what's missing for me. Whose preferred plan is this?
I think I would hope more than anything it is the community's preferred plan.
But how would you know that? Or how can you tell us that you know that?
I would go back to those slides. The fact that like literally the signature feature was an idea from the public, the Sunset Hill, and that proved to be the most popular feature when we took our alternatives out to them. You know, I think we did a great job sort of sourcing and getting input digitally, but also in the meetings, and then even through the public process with the Parks and Rec Board. So I think we've had a lot of voices, and I think they've had the chance to have very deliberate, concrete reactions to the 3 preferred plans and literally rate their favorite things. And then the trick of that is what we have to do is to take the most preferred things and make sure they all play nice together. We don't want to just have a Franken park. We want to have an amazing park, but that it has all the things and the qualities that people rated most important to them. But I think the key part is because we were able to have 3 alternatives, and I'll point out, again, those alternatives were already shaped by the public from our amazing meeting at the site, with ice cream, I might add. The fact that we were able to do that, and like I say, I've never had a project that, again, usually public involvement sort of, it helps us polish a park. You know, usually public involvement isn't making big decisions about is there or is not an off-leash area, because that's sort of done at the system-wide scale. But really what public involvement does is help make a soulful place that's a reflection of the community. And that's like one of the things I'm nutty proud of this, where this most central feature literally came from the ground up from the public. And then when they had a chance to react to it, it was the #1 thing that they latched onto and loved. And the fact that slides could be used on the hill and people could sled on the hill. So I think that's why we got really concrete feedback to all the options that gave us this preferred plan. And then we'll go back and validate it from the community. And while the intent isn't to redesign further after that, this is just a master plan with so much more design left to be done. So even the input we get from this will continue to be part of the master plan to help shape the real plan when there is a real project and a funded phase 1 to kind of keep shaping it.
And if I might add a little bit as well, even further than that, the park plan that we just adopted also identifies a lot of these key features to be needed within our system. Additional playgrounds, additional community gardens, space for teens. We continue to get constant requests for more racket sport courts. And so and with this area being so densely populated, and a lot of the homes and residences not having a lot of green space, I would say that we've also been able to incorporate all of the work from the park plan. And that really does continue to guide every piece of work that we do because it had such significant community engagement. And so Guy and his team were able to take that work, then build on top of it with the community to be even more focused. And then, like Guy said, we will do additional design work. A master plan is a guiding document. It is not the design. We may get into it and there may be different conversations that are had and things may shift. This is really just saying these are the elements that were most desired to be at this park and the intention that we would have with this space. So I hope that that also maybe helps.
Thank you. Council Vice President Forsyth.
Thank you. I'm really excited about this preferred plan. The Wilds was the one that resonated the most with what I've heard from community, and I'm really excited that the community garden aspect was included in the revision. I think it just hits on all the areas that we've all been talking about. I'm interested to hear a bit more about the the ADA aspect of play for the hill slides. I know the Seattle Play Garden has soft landscaping so that those slides can be open and more accessible for all types of play. And then also interested in hearing about the high canopy and what that means for, when we get the big directional rainstorms and even just the misty storms, if those areas are still going to be covered enough for folks.
I'll take an initial crack. Feel free to jump in here. I think in terms of the playability, the biggest thing we've done here is that we actually have topography in the hill, on a flatter site with a playground that's trying to be this great universal experience. You're falling to just relying on the equipment to provide the play value. And it tends to become about different platforms and things like that, or then there's this intent to accommodate ramps. And what I think is fun here is infusing the play into the hillside and using that to create part of the play value is really important. I also think that so much of that really is the detail that will follow kind of the next phase of development, because there's so much nuance. I think when we talk about a universally welcoming playground, our brains first go to mobility issues. And that's actually a pretty modest amount of the population, people who have those mobility challenges. Another huge part and far more influential is thinking about people who are neuroatypical. And having spinning things and movement that are really amazing for neuroatypical people. But those are sort of a lot of details that we're just not in at the master plan. At the master plan level, there's really this acknowledgement that that's a priority to do that, and that we think the framework of the Sunset Hill providing topography as part of the play value is a tool to get us there. But those are really details that we would spend a lot more time figuring out as we go forward. I mean, at this point, we really don't know exactly what the playground equipment is or things like that. Does that address your question?
What I might add to that, if it's all right, is that is, again, one of those items that is a high priority in the park plan as well. So that would go into our design to make sure that we're fulfilling those tenets within the park plan. And one of those high priorities was to increase ADA and inclusive playgrounds throughout our system, whether that's when we replace them or when we build new ones. And so that is will help inform those design decisions when they come down the pike. Yeah. And I would say it's the same as the canopies that you were asking about, like how much rain can get through them. I anticipate we'll talk about that for at least an hour when we design the playground, about what that canopy is and what it is not. And so we will definitely keep that in mind, because it's good feedback, because it's very rainy out there right now.
Two more, just real quick. I would tend to agree with the restroom conversation. I know we've talked about this a lot, and I've heard a lot from community, especially in the, I think is it Meadow, the park up there with the pickleball. I've heard a lot about wanting restrooms, even honey buckets up there. So I appreciate the foresight into the potential for a honey bucket being included somewhere in this park. I'm interested when we're going to get to talk about the gateway icon part of the conversation, and if that's further in the design process.
Yes, that'll happen within the design process, because the determination will have to be made, is this a commissioned artwork? So does it go through the Arts and Culture Commission, or is it simply a part of the design of the park? It's definitely been something that we've talked about, and Guy has some really fun ideas as well. But we're not talking about it tonight, because that does kind of get a little more into the design conversation as opposed to the guiding master plan. But definitely the idea that there would be pieces of art or items within the park that would really be centering for people in that place, because we do also have just park signage standards, right? There will be a park monument sign within this park, and it will be, in line with that. And so that discussion will happen more in design.
Great.
But something I want to add on that, like just let's keep in mind the intent of that, which is no matter what it actually ultimately is, the dream is when we think of Southeast Redmond, what pops into your mind? And if you're a resident, what is your favorite thing? If you had a little Southeast Redmond sticker on your laptop right now, what would be the crazy cool little object that means Southeast Redmond? And it struck us, and our public conversation seemed to bear out, there wasn't an answer to that. And so our dream for whatever that thing becomes, no, I'm going to drop the thing, actually, even that is too prescriptive. But that the idea that there's something in this park that can become that identity, that something maybe one thing, it could be 10 things, it could become the top of Sunset Hill. But that is, at its loftiest, the goal is to help create a strengthened identity for this neighborhood, a civic identity for this neighborhood.
Very cool. I was going to say the same thing just in thinking about it in terms of that Sunset Hill, I think could become very iconic for this neighborhood and for Redmond just as a really cool space. So, and especially coming out of really those community ideas, bringing that in is a wonderful story. Before we go for round two, I'll just give my comments on this topic that a couple council members have raised. I think just as we progress on this, overall, I love what's in here. In particular, I think having a zip line is something I hear a lot from families wanting to see more of that in our parks. Also seeing, the playground itself, the way that it's built is looks like it's going to be different with building into the hillside and those pieces. I think there's going to be a lot of folks that are going to want to access this, as well as things like the community garden in Sunset Hill and some of these other pieces. And so I do think we need to think about, to my colleagues' points, just in general, this is going to be a community park, but it's going to have some things that other parks don't have. And I think it'll actually be such a jewel in our park system. That's what we want. But we have to kind of think about how do we make sure that a community park can feel accessible to everyone, both within the community and beyond in the rest of Redmond. Because I have seen sometimes with community parks that it can feel a little like, am I allowed to be here if I'm not in the neighborhood, or it's a neighborhood park, sorry, not community park, a neighborhood park. So I guess it's just something for us to think about in the long run, what kinds of things we put to make sure that it is accessible. If we're going to put in so many things that will attract people from all over Redmond, in addition to legitimately giving this neighborhood a park that it has lacked. And giving them amenities, because that is really the goal of this, is to also be a little more equitable, because other neighborhoods do have a lot of amenities and a lot of parks, and that's the point of developing this one here. So anyway, I would just say we should keep that in mind as we move forward, and I'll be interested as we get into design and development on that. Council Member Stewart.
Yeah, I don't believe I had a first round, so a couple more questions, sorry. Lighting, we asked about restrooms, we asked about some water stuff. How about lighting? Do we know at this point whether or not that might be something that would be included in the park?
Cool. We talked about this actually at the Parks and Rec Commission meeting the other day. And so, for starters here, there are streetlights around this park, so there's an ambient light level. In theory, parks are closed from dusk until dawn. Well, I will point out, dusk happened 3 hours ago. So there's sort of, 5, okay. Actually, maybe it might have been 8. It feels like, I don't think the sun came up today. But I think that there is an acknowledgement that there's an ambient light level around the park, and that's great. And I think the answer, and I invite you to correct me or add detail, but is, typically you don't probably light park elements for sure. We don't necessarily want to be lighting, actually I'm going to back off that, but we don't typically light park elements, but I would ask the question, is there a way to reconcile the idea that a park is closed from dusk until dawn, but the idea of having some pedestrian lighting that maybe lights the promenade portion through here, so there is more ambient light level? And this what I'm about to say is my opinion, but how does that reconcile with policy and these things is we have these parks and we do want people to use them through the winter, and we do want people to recreate when they get home from home. We do want kids to be able to go out and play with their friends or with their parents. So some level of baseline sort of circulation lighting, it seems to us, is a fair thing to consider. But what you probably want to stay away from, because it risks becoming overly active and burdening the neighborhood, is, oh, we're going to light the basketball court, because now it's a different thing with that. So, rambling answer, it feels like there's room for lighting to let people be using this space without overusing program elements. Discussed. Oh, wait, there you go. Lorraine, you can save me now.
I got you, Guy. I think that it is a conversation that will continue to be had through design. I don't think we have a clear answer. I think, like Guy said, it's easy to say our parks are closed from, dawn and, dusk until dawn. And we have downtown park, which that's not really enforceable, right? I mean, people are walking through that park and walking their dogs before the sun is up, and it is lit. It is also an urban park, which is a different type of park than a neighborhood park. But there are safety concerns with dark, and there are safety concerns with light. And so it really is going to have to be a very intentional conversation that we have through the design process. And like Guy said, being really mindful that if we choose to light, that we are doing it in a way that is enhancing safety and not necessarily inviting use of some of those elements past hours. Because at our parks that do have that type of lighting, they're on timers, they're pretty significant lighting systems. They are not simply lights that stay on all night. So our lights at Perigo, for example, are on timers, and when those fields are not rented, those lights turn off at night. And so it's a harder question to answer, but it is something that the community has brought up, and so it's something we'll look at more and more into design.
Wonderful, thank you. And to that point, Ms. Chapman, the council will actually be in Olympia on the evening of January 31st, so we will not join you, probably, but we really look forward to, I look forward to hearing more about what the community has to say. And thanks, that's really awesome. My colleagues covered all the gratitude, and I echo that night, even in the photos that are shared in this presentation, of that kind of golden hour, and then to see in the packet materials not only every single element, from the little kid who was desperate for the zip line to the parent who was desperate for a place for her teen to hang, for it to all have made it to the page, and then this golden hour with this sunset hill, it took my breath away. So I'm very excited about it. I just want to offer actually to my council colleagues how inspiring this is, and maybe to borrow a word from my colleague, what if this wasn't a jewel? What if it didn't have to be? This planning process that we are going through right now has rewilded a 3-acre space, and that's replicable, and it's making dynamic topography where it doesn't currently exist. That's replicable. Moving dirt around is replicable, and we have been talking about other neighborhoods that have been in need of parks in the future, and who are not necessarily included fully in the park plan that we've just adopted for the future. So those are really inspiring, and those are some of the things I'm going to be carrying forward with me. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Stewart. I'm going to pretend like I intended to skip you in the first round so that you could end us on that really great insight. Are there any other questions from the council or comments? Councilmember Fields.
So I heard your response to my question. Follow up, I won't be able to be here January 31st because I'll be out of town. But I would love some sort of empirical data. I don't know how you would gather it to show me that, in fact, the neighborhood in general, this is their preferred plan. I get what you said. I understand the process. I think it was a great process, not being critical, but I'm not convinced. As someone pointed out, this neighborhood has been desperate for a park for a long time. I've campaigned over there a couple of times. I have friends there. this always came up as an issue. And there was a vigilante group that wanted to develop their own park at one point. They wanted to get the blessings of the city of Redmond to create a laser tag and all kinds of things. So there's been a certain amount of hunger for a park. I took my daughter when she was on prednisone to a food mall once. And I said, "You want Mexican food?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, what about burgers?" "Yeah." "Well, what about Italian food?" "Yeah." She wanted all of it because she was on prednisone. These people are going to say yes. They want all of these things because they're great ideas. But I want to be convinced that this community is in fact making a choice deliberately, and that this is what they want.
And I think we have like an exceptional background packages from all our meetings that actually has a remarkable amount of empirical data. So we'll be happy to make sure you get that.
Great. Thank you so much. Yeah, look forward to that follow-up. So in terms of next steps on this item, can you just give us a sense of when we'll next see this?
Yes. So after our community meeting, where we are going to be getting feedback similar to what you had this evening, Berger will be taking the feedback from you, the Parks and Trails Commission, and that community meeting to polish up this draft preferred plan and make it a part of a larger master plan document that will have the survey results and other empirical data, as well as these designs and precedent images that they had put forward. And we hope to have that to council in March. Is that, yeah. I believe we're on the schedule for March. And then from there, we are already working on our business case to add this to the CIP and create a budget proposal for it. And we'll be looking towards grants for this particular park.
Great. Well, I know for my part, I'll be chomping at the bit to add that into the CIP. So looking forward to that budget discussion. Well, thank you all for this great discussion. And I think with that, we can close out this item. Thank you very much to our team here that has done the work and the design. Thank you very much for your presentation. With that. Well, thank you. So the last item on the agenda is council talk time. I will run through a few items and then we'll open it up for discussion. The first thing I just wanted to start with, since we have two new council members, and welcome to your first study session. Very excited to have you here and just to have all of our council here working together. Just in terms of logistics of talk time, this is a piece that we have every study session, so that means basically every other week for council. And it's an opportunity for any council member to be able to raise questions, have conversation. As we sometimes discuss, we are bound by the Open Public Meetings Act, which means that there's a lot of things that we can't discuss except in open session. And sometimes there's just informal things we want to be able to talk about, share. I think, and it's also a place where, as council leadership, will give you some updates on conversations we've been having behind the scenes that don't quite fit into a more formal agenda, and ask some questions as we're doing some planning going into the future. One thing which is on the agenda here, but that I related to this, that I am hoping is that potentially as part of our council retreat this year, we can also discuss how we want to use council talk time, if there's any improvements we want to have to it, any new structures. And one of the things that we do as part of council talk time, if you're going to bring up a significant idea, like a new proposal that you want council to work on, is that we did establish last year a hopper process where you can actually write down the details of that idea and have it submitted so it can be attached to the council talk time item. So that way council members can kind of review your idea before you present it during the hopper during the council talk time. So anyway, I can talk with both of the new council members about that, but I just wanted to raise that and to say that part of, I think, in the retreat, it would be great to revisit how that hopper process is working. It was a new innovation we came up with, so I think there's more to do in terms of the process. But I just wanted to kind of throw that out there, and for all council members to note that I think I hope that in the time to come that this can really be a good space for us to have conversation. Oftentimes it's nights like this where we've had 2 robust or 3 robust conversations, so we're a little bit tired. But it is kind of the space that we create to be able to share information with each other. Moving on, I sent out an email to you all on the committee presiding officer slate, and just wanted to do a temperature check since we're hoping to put this on consent to make sure, is everybody good putting the slate that I put out on consent? I can read it out. So the proposal would be to have Councilmember Fields continue as chair of the Finance Administration and Communications Committee, Councilmember Stewart continue as the Planning and Public Works chair, Councilmember Salahuddin chair the Public Safety and Human Services Committee, and Councilmember Nueva Camina chair the Environment, Parks and Environmental Sustainability Committee. So that was based on all the feedback that all of you sent in terms of your preferences to chair or not chair and which committees you were hoping to chair. Just wanted to take a moment to see maybe sense of thumbs if people are good on putting this onto consent for a future meeting. Good. Okay, I'm not seeing any objections, so we will put that onto consent. And thank you all for your leadership, and to all who chaired over the last 2 years as well. Really appreciate that leadership. Third item on the agenda, council retreat planning. So I know a couple of you have asked me about when the retreat is happening. We had a date on the calendar and it got canceled. And so just wanted to note, we sent out a survey. What we've been thinking about doing, in the past we worked with Anita Page to be able to do a 2-day retreat, and what Council Vice President Forsyth and I were thinking about in this case, especially with some new council members, and I think some issues to work on. Part of what we've worked on with Anita Page, for those who weren't there, was especially around our READY AR, which is Respect, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Anti-Racism work for our city, and really kind of coalescing around that. The hope on that right now is that the next step will be a joint retreat type of meeting where we can be also with the directors and the mayor to be able to coalesce on kind of some of our final city vision and next steps on that plan. I think we also want to have time as a council to be able to have a retreat, talk about how we work together, just some of the basics also about just like council processes, as well as have some discussions around it being a budget year, what people's priorities are. So what we're thinking is to actually, instead of having a 2-day retreat that'll be both of those pieces, is to have one that would happen in the next month and a half or so. That would be a 1-day retreat where we would have facilitated discussions just around council processes, connect with each other, and also talk about budget priorities. And then in later February, early March, be able to have that convening with the directors, since they're actually still finishing a bit of their side of the work with Anita, and we would all convene together to be able to have that joint discussion around the READY AR work and do a retreat at that time. So given that, just wanted to see if that is of interest to the rest of the council to divide up into those two 1-day retreats instead of 1 2-day retreat. And we have sent out first the scheduling for that first piece, and then I can follow up in a moment on the second piece. But first wanted to leave a little space to see if others have thoughts, questions. Seems like a good plan. Councilmember Stewart?
We're really in favor of transitioning to 1 day at a time, especially to not have anyway, really love to have 1 weekend day to go outside and play and 1 weekend day to do council things. That's great, thanks.
Seeing some nods. Councilmember Nueva Camina?
I co-sign that completely. Breaking it up and being able to still space so that we're rested to get through the rest of our week instead of going through and having a long week and then a full weekend and then a twice as long week.
Great, thanks for that feedback. Councilmember Fields?
What was your question? Do we want it split up, or do we agree with the topics, or both?
It was, I guess, both, yeah. Do you have any comments on how we structure the retreat, some goals, any of the goals, and then also mostly, are you good with us breaking it into two sections?
I'm certainly good with breaking it into two. I've been to the retreats over the past couple of years. I'm not sure how to say this without sounding like a jerk, but I've done that many times before, so no problem. I'm not sure I want to spend the time to pretend that we figure out a way to work together. I think we just need to work together, and I think everybody needs to understand that they were elected by the people in this community, and that we have to put all of our personal issues aside and become decision makers. Given that the 2050 plan is really bearing down on us, I would rather at least one of those days, if you want to combine those two topics of DEI and figuring out how to work together into one, I'm okay with that. But I really think that we should spend the day on the 2050 plan, make sure that we understand what we're doing, make sure we understand our responsibilities, make sure we understand how to be heard by the mayor and by staff, and how we can bring the voice of the community to the decisions that we're going to make in the months and year ahead. So that's my preference.
That's great feedback, yeah. And I definitely think in that first retreat day, a part of what I was thinking about is really for us to coalesce around what is it we want to do, not necessarily how we want to do it only. But I think the how piece is more getting down to a couple of the nuts and bolts on some things that have come up repeatedly. Like, for example, the items from the audience question, or, how Ombuds is working for us, if we could make that work better, or those types of things. So I think that's the logistical piece. And then I would imagine a big bulk of it will be really the goals of what we want to achieve.
So in that regard, I would retract a little bit of what I said, because in the past we didn't have a laundry list necessarily of process improvement. We talked about code of conduct and those things. And I'm not saying those things aren't important, but process improvement, a list of what we can do to do our jobs better, I'm all about. I think that would be great. I just don't want to spend a lot of time discussing what we all should have learned in kindergarten.
Yeah, understood. I think we can revisit any of our touchy-feely things briefly, and then get into kind of the process improvements, all those details. What I will say is, obviously that's your thoughts, and so what we can do before that first retreat is to be able to send out to you all a survey to gather, what are the topics that you're hoping we can cover, the issues that have been recurring that we just need a little more time to be able to talk through, to make sure that we can structure that agenda most efficiently. And also make sure that we capture what everyone wants. The other thing that we're hoping to do in advance, in the past 2 years, a new process that we had put in was for the council as part of the retreat to kind of brainstorm our priorities live and then do a ranking afterwards. And we came up with this large ranked list. And I think especially for budget, that actually 2 years ago, I think did work pretty well for us to figure out what were some of our top budget priorities, so we could send that to the mayor and directors to make sure they got it into the draft budget they'll deliver to us in the fall. I think we'd like to have some of that discussion again, but in order to make it a little more efficient, what we were gonna do was send out to the council, have you all submit your top priorities for budget, and then we could we'll put them into a survey where we can do a pre-ranking. So we go into that retreat seeing kind of the ranked list, and then we can have a discussion about it. And it wouldn't be set in stone, because the point of the retreat would be for us to discuss, and potentially something gets ranked lower, but that council member could speak to it, and maybe we end up ranking it higher. But just to get us into that initial list and to kind of find some more efficiency in that process. So I just wanted to preview that as well, and if anyone has any concerns on that, let me know. Yeah, Councilmember Stewart.
Yeah, just a nuance there that I think is important is that, as we discussed earlier this evening, we haven't had financials. Some of us have previewed, and hopefully the new council members received that slideshow. Anyway, we have not discussed in open session how our budget is performing this biennium yet. And so to be able to go into a conversation about what we are interested in the budget, we need to know how we're doing first on the work that we've already agreed to do to deliver services to the city. I feel like that's important to have prior to a future conversation about new budget wish lists.
Yep. Thank you. And yes, I do think, hopefully, as we heard from Director Cochran, we will be getting that information soon. And I think that's a great point, well taken. As we enter into the budget process, we can't budget for the next one if we don't know how we've been spending against the last one. So great points. And then one last thing on dates. It sounds like overall people are okay with us going to this 2 separate pieces of retreat. Anita has indicated in terms of doing the Ready AR work that she could do either February 24th or 25th or March 23rd or 24th. I wanted to do a quick gut check. I don't know if people have their calendars on hand, but otherwise I can just send it out and you can send back your feedback on which of those dates work for you. But wanted to see, are there any red flags that people have on any of those dates thinking about it? Councilmember Anderson?
Not thinking personally here. I'd love to see the dates available against our budget calendar in terms of when, because the process comes to us in certain pieces. And I'm curious from council leadership and the mayor, what you expect to get out of an AR process in March compared to what we might be thinking about spending the money on later in the year.
That's
food for thought.
Yeah, great. Let me just write that down so I don't forget. Okay.
But to answer your direct question, I'm free. Thanks.
Great. Okay, well, thank you all. And one other note, just in terms of retreat planning and logistics, we are working on hiring a new legislative assistant / volunteer coordinator who will be able to work with the council on these types of things. For now, you're going to be seeing the mayor's assistant, Uni helping with these types of things. But hopefully within the next couple months, we'll be seeing a new person come on. And I will say that Council Vice President Forsyth and I were able to join in the interview for the final, most recent final candidate for that position and give some feedback on that position just in order to make sure that hopefully we hire a person who can best support the council as we move forward in terms of doing policy analysis and assisting in our needs, as well as in that volunteer coordinator position that we envisioned. Councilmember Fields.
On that, has the job description, planned work been changed from what it was? Will it still be a shared position? At one point it was half-time council, half-time mayor's office, then it became parks, half-time council, half-time. We all had concerns, or I'm sorry, some of us had concerns about the split responsibilities or direction. Do we have an update on what that position will look like and who they will report to?
Yeah, that position will still be within the mayor's office, and so we still aren't able as council members to have staff report to us. But one of the things we established with council leadership is that we have a regular meeting with that person to be able to check in on council needs and also check in with Lisa Marr, who oversees that position in the mayor's office, to make sure that we're communicating if we have any feedback on how that position is best in supporting the council. It will be still that half and half. I'd say one of the improvements that we added in terms of the description of the position was just making sure that we were clear that we're looking for someone not only who can do administrative work, but also can do some, policy analysis or research when council members have ideas and things that they need, since we don't have our own staff otherwise, and that can also work with some of the staff internally, as well as that are going to be able to do that volunteer management role. So.
Okay.
But would definitely welcome feedback as the new person comes on board, and because as council leadership, we'll be able to provide direction to that position, even though we won't be managing them. We'll be working with the mayor's office to make sure they're getting the adequate direction. I don't know if you have anything else to say on that, Mayor Bernie. Okay, great. Next topic, and I'll try to be quick on these, but thank you all for that discussion. Just wanted to make sure we were all on the same page as we go forward in our planning. Next discussion, I just wanted to note the legislative session started yesterday, the state legislative session. It'll run for 60 days, and it's the short legislative session. We all got an email from Amy Tsai, our chief policy advisor. She's going to send out emails every single week to us, giving us updates. For the new council members, we passed a legislative agenda in the fall that directs our staff on how they should advocate. If you're interested, any council member is interested in being able to testify on particular bills that are covered by some of the topics in our legislative agenda, just a reminder to reach out to Amy and coordinate. It's actually, I've found in the past when I've reached out on things that it's been great, because she and Brianna, our chief lobbyist, will send you talking points and help you prepare for those types of things. And if you're doing something that isn't on the ledge agenda, just make sure to note that you're personally testifying on that. But and I just say, hopefully we can also use this space of talk time if there's anything that you feel passionate about and wanted to just raise to your fellow council members to know that certain bills are coming up. Feel free to raise them at talk time to just let us know, or if we see any issues where we want to talk as a city about how we're kind of showing up in these spaces. I just wanted to make sure it's open as we're going in, and that we all are kind of aware of how we're showing up and advocating together for our city's best interests and our values. So just wanted to note a few things of unique scheduling that you'll see on the calendar coming up. If you look out at the extended agenda, I sent you all the agenda for the upcoming business meeting, but also attach the extended agenda, and just wanted to note a few things. One is AWC days. That week, in the past, sometimes we've canceled the council meeting the night before we go to AWC days. This year, that meeting is not canceled. So just in case you were wondering, it is happening in early February. Also, we took a look at August, which last year we, for the first time, decided to take all of August except for one meeting off. And I think some of the items got so stacked up that when we came back in the fall, we had a really busy fall. And given that this is a budget year and that we also have the comp plan to finish and some other big items, we decided that we're just going to take 2 weeks off in August, but we are going to still have some of that August recess. So you'll see that on the extended agenda. And then just a note for December that we are planning hopefully to finish after the first meeting in December and cancel meetings after that. And also this will be a budget year, so we'll have some some additional meetings that might get scheduled in the fall after October, and sometimes using Thursday nights to be able to do some of that work, although we are talking about how we can do that work more efficiently so that we don't have to use too many of your Thursday nights. But just wanted for everyone who, in planning your schedules, to know that there may be some additional nights just as we get into budget. I know it's really far look ahead. Yep.
So we're just trying to build off on the really good work that we did last during the budget, making sure that information is received early and we process through that so that we can spend fewer hours on the budget when the budget actually drops, because it won't be a surprise. So we'll work with the chair of the FAC to make sure that if we have some items that we need to, if not in study session, bring to your committee to make sure that you get those ahead of time and have discussions ahead of time. Any ideas from the council, getting those sooner than later is helpful too as we work on the budget. But I have a challenge to you. My hope is to finish the budget before Thanksgiving, see if we can get that passed. So I know. I leave that to all of you, and we'll work with you on that, but that's kind of the goal. And so if you have ideas on things that we can handle earlier to kind of process through it, please let us know, because I'm really excited about the idea of not dragging it on to December, to really kind of getting it done before the holidays. So
yeah, and hopefully we can work with our trustee FAC chair to be able to figure this out as well, about how work we can do in committee. Councilmember Fields.
Yeah, no, I think that we made great progress towards making the process more informative early, and I really appreciate the mayor's office and the council for doing that. I would say that well, you know what? I'm gonna talk to you in private about this.
Great.
So I'm not ready to bring this up right now.
Sounds good.
All right.
Thank you. We'll follow up with the rest of you after that conversation. Okay, that brings me to the end of my list. I think I had a few extra things, but I'm going to open it up now. Council members, does anyone else have items for council talk time? I won't normally have such a long list. Council member Anderson.
Just a quick clarification. You mentioned the Hopper form, but it would be helpful to have when are the due dates for that in terms of expectations around that form, just for these folks? And can we get a copy of that sent out to everybody again?
Yes, I will send out the Hopper form and a reminder on the guidelines, instructions. And then one of the things we also created last year was a OneDrive folder where you can view but not edit, which is OPMA allowed, that has a bunch of different council documents. And I'll share that out with you all so that you have, I think there's a couple other documents in there that'll be helpful, but the Hopper form is in there.
And then a follow-up question on that. So the first question was, when's the due date? It's the Wednesday before the meeting by 5? And who are we giving it to that Jason isn't here anymore?
Yeah, I think that is something for us to work out. So okay. I'll make sure it's clear. I think it does say in the document
Wednesday before 5 o'clock or something like that?
Yeah, it has the deadline. I don't want to misspeak, but I'll make sure that I include that in there.
Okay, and then a clarification question. Does the Hopper form have to go to talk time, or can it go to a committee chair?
The Hopper form, as we all agreed, was designed to go to talk time.
And then gets routed?
Yeah, and then after, because the idea is that we all read the Hopper form. The person who's proposing the idea uses talk time to explain the idea, and then the council essentially decides where does it go next, which likely will be committee. So it's and we don't go deep dive into the issue. We mostly say, do we want to talk more about the issue, and that's where it goes. And we figure out where it goes next, or does it get staff review or legal review or whatever.
Thank you. This is the end of the quiz. Thanks.
Thanks. Great. And Councilmember Stewart.
Cool. Thanks for helping us be set up for an awesome year. It's cold outside, and the parks maintenance staff has a tradition of every Wednesday in the winter, they do a hot soup lunch, and they rotate who brings the crock pots full of hot soup. So Dave Tuchek and Director Hamilton have invited the council back out to host one of the hot soup lunch Wednesdays. Last term, Councilmember Carson and I did it. Just wanted to extend the offer to the council. So if that is something that you are interested in, serving hot soup and hanging out with the parks maintenance staff sometime during the winter season, so this month, next month would probably be best, you can reach out directly to Director Hamilton. Thanks. Tell us what kind of soup you made.
Thank you, and in advance, thanks to our park staff and also our public works staff who, as the times get cold and slippery, I'm sure will be busy working hard and probably over extra hours. Any other comments, questions? Mayor Bernie.
We are concerned about the March 12th meeting. We have multiple people who have, there's National League of Cities, there's another conference I might be at, some people are on vacation and can't attend, so we're trying to find out if there will actually be quorum on that day or how that will work. So if you have your calendar in front of you to check March 12th, if not, if you could let your council president know if you can or cannot be there that day so we know what to do if we aren't going to have quorum. So put that on the radar.
I'm available. I don't need to check with you, so.
Does anyone else who hasn't noted want to raise if you're concerned about March 12th? Okay. Well, I will send out an email just in case you check your schedule and realize that this is not a great date, but we will want to just double check on this, that we do have enough council members for quorum. All right. Well, I think that brings us to the end of our agenda. So if there is no objection, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.